Hey guys, today I'm joined by Nasser Mashni, the president of APAN. An exciting guest. I'm so honored to have you here today. How are you going today?
Yeah, really good, George. A pleasure to be with you.
So tell me about your background. So I know you're a Palestinian background, correct?
Yep.
And were you born in like Palestine or were you born here?
No, I was born here. So I was, when Israel was created, like every colonial state, it has to get rid of its indigenous people. And part of creating a Jewish state in a land that had a Jewish minority was to demographically engineer that outcome. To create a Jewish majority, you have to get rid of the majority.
Yep.
And just like this country, this is a colonial country that was once 100% indigenous. So before, don't worry about the Dutch and anything, but Captain Cook, let's say British settlement, was 100% indigenous. Palestine was once 100% indigenous. And those indigenous people were Muslim, Christian, Jew, Baha'i, Samaritan, every one of Abraham's religions and every derivative thereof. Well, in creating a Jewish state in a land where you have a Jewish minority, and to create that Jewish majority, you have to create the demographic change. And that demographic change is called ethnic cleansing. So when we talk about settler colonies, whether it's, the United States or Turtle Island or Aotearoa, New Zealand or here, you kill everyone. Now, you could get away with that in the 1600s, the 1700s, the 1800s, South America, the same, the whole of the Pacific. You couldn't get away with it in 1948. And so Palestinians were expelled. Almost 90%, of the indigenous Palestinians of Palestine were expelled. And that's what Palestinians call the Nakba, the catastrophe. The catastrophe. So my father was one of those people.
Okay.
So he was ethnically cleansed from Jerusalem in 1948 and ended up on a journey that took him through Jordan, Lebanon, ultimately to Australia, where he met my mother and I was born.
Oh, fantastic. So in terms of the Nakba, right, was it a systematic kind of thing, or was it kind of just happened in the sense? So what I mean by that, was there a strategy involved? Was it like a military operation supported by certain governments, or was it kind of just like a forced push in by? I know it was the British, right, that were kind of setting the stones for all this. It's always the British, right? So they were kind of setting the stones for all this. Do you know much about that and how it went down?
Of course, yeah. So if you go back, number one, look at it geographically. Where Palestine sits today, it's actually on the cusp of Africa, Asia, and Europe. So it's a central point. Aside from being the Holy Land and, the crown in every empire's, the jewel in every empire's crown, Palestine geographically is very important. It has been forever. And it was coveted by Napoleon, the Crusades, but also the Romans and the Greeks and the Phoenicians and the Egyptians. Every manner and form of conqueror and empire went through the Holy Land, went through Palestine. And so it's been coveted. So if you go back to, if you will, World War I, and this was where the fix happened, and, most people think of this now in the West from an October 7 perspective. But if you go back to World War I, the whole Arab world was occupied by the Ottomans, the Turks. And everybody knows of the world's most famous Arab. His name was Lawrence, George, Lawrence of Arabia, because they made a movie about Lawrence. And Lawrence, who was a British army officer, went to the Arabs of Arabia under the Ottoman Empire and said to the Arabs, if you fight with us against the Germans, if we win, you can have independence. Now, the Arabs had been under the Ottoman Empire for 400 years at that point, 390 something years. And that's an appealing request to an appealing opportunity to people under occupation. Fight with us, and if we win, you get liberation. And so the Arabs, plural, all of us, fought with the Allies, with the diggers, Aussie diggers, with the British, and we won. And so if you go to any World War I memorial, George, whether it's the any cenotaph you might see or any war memorial, you'll see World War One. You'll see Palestine written there.
Yeah,
you'll see
I have seen it, actually. You're right.
Yeah, because we existed. We were part of the good guys.
Yeah.
What you won't see is the Balfour Declaration. And the Balfour Declaration was written in November of 1917 whilst World War I was going on and the Arabs were fighting. We're fighting with the Allies, the British and the Aussies and the French and the Americans, to beat the Germans. The Balfour Declaration, Lord Balfour, wrote a letter to Baron Rothschild.
Yeah.
And he said, infamously, that His Majesty's government views with favour the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine, understanding that nothing shall be done to prejudice the non-Jewish inhabitants, or thereabouts. People can look up the Balfour Declaration for its exact words. But what it was a rich white guy promising brown people's houses to another rich white guy after having told those brown people, if you fight with us against these other people, we'll give you your house back. And so the Balfour Declaration happened, and then the charge of the Light Horse Brigade, the last modern charge, a cavalry charge in history, into Gaza, into Beersheba in English. That charge happens, and the Allied forces go all the way through Jerusalem, all the way through Damascus. The Ottoman Empire ends. Arabia is liberated from Ottoman occupation. And then just like a show just like an Oprah Winfrey show, the British gave everybody countries. Lebanon, you get a country. Syria, have a country. Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, you can all have a country. Palestine, you can have a mandate.
Yeah.
And we're like, hold on, what's a mandate? How come everybody else got a country? Why don't we get a country? And the Balfour Declaration, because they'd promised Lord Rothschild and the Zionists, quote unquote, at that time it was a political ideology that most Jews renounced.
Yeah.
Most Jews renounced Zionism then.
So Zionism, would you say, is like the, I don't know, I would just make it like the extremist orthodox? Is that how you would describe Zionism to like an average Australian who doesn't know? No?
No. Zionism is just a political ideology, like socialism, like capitalism, like communism. It's a political ideology. Now, how it manifests itself for Jews who want a country or a Jew-only state, is what's happening now. But if we go back to there, Zionism and Theodor Herzl, who founded Zionism in the late 19th century, wanted to create this colonial state because of rising anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a real thing. It's been happening throughout history, and it's particularly a European Christian white disease, anti-Semitism. And Theodor Herzl wanted to create a Jewish homeland. They'd looked at Uganda, they looked at the Kimberley in Australia, they looked at Argentina. In the end, they settled on Palestine. Infamously, one of the explorer parties went to Palestine and wrote back, the bride is beautiful, but she's married. They've gone to Palestine and seen that there's people there, people living, thriving, but she's married, that we can't take it because there's people there. Mm-hmm. That didn't stop Theodor Herzl and his friends. He wrote to Mehmet III, I think, I can't remember, or second, who was the last ruler of the Ottoman Empire, trying to buy a section of the Ottoman Empire, being Palestine, for a Jewish state. Anyway, back to Balfour. He promised a Jewish homeland there, notwithstanding nothing should be done to prejudice the non-Jewish inhabitants. This is really important. The fact that I'm an Australian and speak like us, even though I look like them, George, means that somebody was prejudiced.
Yeah.
You'd think. Anyway, so World War I happens, everybody gets a country, we get a mandate, and then suddenly, there's a steady flow of Jews to Palestine. Now, I say Jews, there's always been Jews in Palestine.
Yeah.
My dad's first girlfriend was a Jewish woman. He was a Muslim, ended up marrying a Christian. In Palestine, how you celebrated God never mattered. It shouldn't matter in Australia how you celebrate God, or if you celebrate God, when you celebrate them, how that manifests itself.
Yeah.
It's an individual's right to or not to believe or celebrate in a God. And so there was a steady stream of Jews came in. And we're like, hold on a second, everybody's got a country, what's this mandate bulldust? Next thing you know, it's World War II.
Yep.
And they're like, we've got to park everything. The Germans are at it again. I'm like, Germans? What have the Germans got to do with us? They're not here. We want a country. World War II finishes. The horrors of the Holocaust, yeah?
Yeah.
Horrors of the Holocaust. And the world collectively, with guilt, decide that they have to do something so that this should never happen again. And so from that we get, all of the amazing international laws that exist today that aren't used, yeah? That aren't used.
They look good, though.
Yeah, they look good. Particularly the Genocide Convention, etc. And I read just fleetingly this morning on Twitter that in Switzerland they've stopped a conference on the rights of people in war because they couldn't get all of the signatories to agree on a consensus. I mean, this is where we're at, where Switzerland's, cancelling conferences. Anyway, World War II finishes and the crimes of the Holocaust, and they went never again, and we need to, everyone suddenly became a Zionist. In the sense of, Zionism is, we need to create a Jewish homeland.
Yeah.
And when I say everyone, they don't count us, as everyone, because, we're brown, we're others. So everyone is the colonial white world. Yeah. So the UN today is almost 200 countries. At the time, the UN was like about 50 countries. And out of those 50 countries, around 30 said we should partition Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state. And we were like, hold on, what do you mean? You're going to cut my house in half? Who gave you the authority to cut my house? No, the Holocaust. Well, the Holocaust was Germans.
So what was that initial, when that first went down after or during World War II, after World War II, what was that, like, was that met with blood and fire, or was that was it just all diplomacy at the time, people speaking?
So it's still diplomacy at this point.
Okay.
Yeah, it's still diplomacy, yeah. And like, the Arab League is there going, this is outrageous. And the odd brown country that was a member of the UN, the odd brown country, said, no, this is just crazy, yeah. And so about 50 countries in the United Nations, and the way the United Nations works is the General Assembly, and then they pass resolutions, and then the Security Council creates a law. Yeah. And so based on Security Council resolutions, the UN can act. So America and the allies, being Australia and Britain and a few others, went to Iraq without a UN Security Council resolution, which is why it was an illegal war. Yeah. So decision to partition Palestine was a General Assembly thing that passed 30-10 with 10 abstentions, roughly, and 31 or 32 and 10 no's and a dozen abstentions out of 50 countries. Yeah, so 200 countries today, a quarter of today's world, and only 60% of that quarter. So today, 15% of today's world suggested we should cut Palestine in half and create a Jewish state for people from Europe who are Jewish, not denying Jewish connection to the land, but Europeans who are Jewish. And people like my father and my grandfather, etc., that have lived there for thousands of years, who may have Phoenician ancestry, Greek ancestry, Jewish ancestry, Nabatean ancestry, Lydian Greeks, Anatolian Greek, all of the empires that have been through Palestine, and there's dozens of them.
Yep.
Who knows what my genetic makeup actually is, that the rights of these post-Holocaust, their rights were greater than mine, that we would cut the country in half. And that never got a Security Council resolution. So it was a General Assembly motion that was passed with a majority, 50 countries, 30 odd said yes. But it was never a Security Council resolution. So basically it was a suggestion, never law, never law. And based on that, there was a war. Now, the war happens late 47 into 48 and then sort of ends in 49. There's an armistice declared in 49. But in the preceding years from end of World War II, in fact, before World War II, but particularly from World War II to that sort of late 47 period, the British had been training, arming the Zionist forces, and they were Zionist terror gangs. It should be very clear that at the time there were wanted posters for people who became later Israeli prime ministers. Wanted posters that were issued by the British. Australian diggers served in the British police in Palestine, and I met many of them when my father was still alive, when they were still alive, and they used to tell me of the horrors that the Jewish terrorists used to commit on the civilian Palestinians. Those Jewish terrorists, Irgun, Haganah, Stern Gang, they ended up becoming the Israeli Defense Force, we call it the Israeli Occupation Force, that are committing the genocide today in Gaza and have been doing so for the past 17 months. Back then, the British were not only aiding, training and giving support to those terrorist gangs, they were also handicapping Palestinians, housing demolitions, expelling leaders. You could get hung for having a knife if you were a Palestinian, but not if you're a Jew. And so the UN passes this motion. The British says, we're going to give up the mandate to Palestine. We've given it to the UN. We're leaving on May 14, 1948. The British leave. Amazingly, the Israeli terror forces know how to fly the British planes that get left behind. The Israeli terror forces know how to drive the British tanks that got left behind. The Israeli terror forces know where all the arms caches are of the British forces that left behind. And so Palestinians were left to defend Palestine with World War I ammunition, whatever was left. Often in some of the stories I've heard, 1 gun and 10 bullets and 5 fighters type stuff, real, basic guerrilla warfare type stuff against a trained, equipped military with an air force. And what resulted in that is the partition said there's a country, we're going to give 55% of it to the Jews, who were at that time about a third of the population, and 45% of it to the 67% of the population. In 1948, the Jews, some of them were Palestinian Jews, overwhelmingly the rest were European Jews, owned about 10% of the land.
Just quickly, so on the Palestinian Jews who were already there and weren't part of this European migration, what were their sentiments during the time? Did they just allow, were they just allowance of this, or did they kind of put some resistance as well, in essence?
So anecdotally, the majority were against Zionism. The majority were against.
Yeah.
And in fact, there's a story a dear friend of mine tells of her grandmother and her Jewish neighbor, who was Palestinian, when the first... so this is before World War II when they were coming. And you should understand, like in a rural setting, and this probably would have been the case for yourself, George, women breastfed each other's kids.
Yeah.
It just, was a natural thing to do. If somebody was out and the kid was screaming, they just put them on. So this woman, her Jewish neighbor, was a wet nurse to my dear friend's father. And when they were coming, and my friend's, well, she was a Muslim, she said, look, there's some people coming, we should start baking and cooking. And her friend said, this is not good. These people haven't come to live here peacefully. And that was true then, and she prophesied that, and it's a reality today. That what happened was, to create this Jewish homeland, they had to expel as many Palestinians as they could, and it's always been about as much Palestinian geography as possible with as little Palestinian demography as possible. More land, less people.
When you say expel, is there a percent or anecdotal evidence of, was it mostly through killings or through forced migration, you have to leave, basically?
Yeah. So there's a brilliant book by an Israeli historian, a Jewish guy. His name is Ilan Pape. It's called The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. And he was able to go into the archives of the Israeli government and the press, etc.
Like the National Archives.
Yeah. And to get out all of the stuff. David Ben-Gurion, who was the first prime minister of the State of Israel, had convened a committee to establish the State of Israel. And they put together what they called Plan Dalet, D-A-L-E-T. It's the fourth letter of the Hebrew language, Plan D. And it was about how do we make, articulated ethnically cleansing Palestine. And you've got to remember what Cortez was able to do to South America by burning the ships behind him and introducing syphilis and having, steel and guns, etc., versus spears and bows and arrows, swords, etc., meant that, a small force could overtake a huge amount. But again, that's the 1500s,
Yeah.
And you think about what was done here with the colonial wars, again, muskets and guns and cannons, etc., sailing ships against an indigenous population. This is 1948, so people's grandparents' lifetimes. They couldn't do that. But what they could do was create fear. And so Plan Dalet mapped out the entirety of historic Palestine and all of the villages, the leaders in those villages, any of the conspirators within those villages that had been bought off, and then detailed what should be done in those villages. So if you imagine Palestine as a bit of dirt, like a rectangle, a long square, the villages in the north were surrounded from the southeast and west. The terror forces went in there, Israeli Zionist Jewish terror forces went in there, and they killed the leader. And they killed the second guy. And then they got the third guy and they said, you've got 4 hours, 24 hours, whatever it might be. Otherwise, we're going to start killing you. And they did this to villages in the north, in the east, and in the south. But what had happened before that, on April 8 in 1948, a village in West Jerusalem, just outside of West Jerusalem, called Deir Yassin, on the 8th of April 1948, this was a little village, 300 people, that had friendships with the local Jewish village, and they had signed a mutual non-aggression, non-fight agreement. Let everybody else do their shit. We've got sheep, you've got goats, we've got olives, you've got lemons. Let's just live like we've always lived. Mutual agreement, Palestinian Jews, yeah. The Zionists came to Deir Yassin, which was the first massacre, surrounded it and butchered people, tore babies out of mothers' wombs, demanded a baker throw a baby into an oven.
Wow.
And these are all the lies that the Israelis told about October 7 are actual factoids from April 1948. And then they let enough people survive. And they sent some of them north and said, tell them what's happening. We're on our way if they don't move. They sent some of them east, some of them south, some of them west. And so that terror, the terror of Deir Yassin, spread through as wildfire.
What year was this, by the way, again? Sorry?
1948.
1948, okay, cool.
So this is April 48. The British don't give the keys to the Zionist terror gangs, the Jewish terror gangs, until May.
Okay.
May 14. So this is 6 weeks before the British have left.
Okay.
The mandate still exists. The British should have been, quote unquote, protecting us as British subjects, but didn't. So April 8, May 14, 6 weeks later, they go, we're leaving in great ceremony and pomp. They get on a ship and just leave all the guns behind for the Jewish terror gangs. So that Plan Dalet, so the Palestine is ethnically cleansed, 90% of it. 750 Palestinians are forced out of their homes at the end of bayonets. 540 villages are destroyed so that Palestinians can't come home. And so Palestinians end up in what we call the collar countries around Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan and Egypt, the collar countries.
And how were they received during that time? Because I hear stories growing up, this is just, by the way, I'm going to just throw out salt of the earth type words and you can sophisticate them if you like. But I heard that a lot of the Arab countries surrounding don't necessarily, they're not open arms about bringing in people. They're kind of like a bit like, stay where you're at. We don't really want this mess. Is that true, or was it more open arms and the Arab countries kind of like, you come, we'll protect you?
Yeah, so you remember for 400 odd years before that, there was no border, yeah? So my brother lived there, my cousin lived here, and then the French and the British drew a line and suddenly Iraq existed and Jordan existed, Suddenly I had a different passport.
Yeah.
So the brotherhood of the Arab nation was absolute in its resistance to colonialism, whomever it was, whether it was Turkish colonialism or British or Franco-colonialism.
Yeah.
But there was also a brotherhood based around a shared culture, a shared food and music and language. We're the same people. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
was it like a Persian kind of inspired kind of collective, or was this more an Islamic inspired collective? Like, was it like an ancient respect to the Persian Empire before, or not really?
No, so the Persian Empire is Persia. The Arabians, Arabs are Arabs.
Okay, so it's different.
Yeah.
Okay.
For many Arabs, when you say that, it's like saying that Turks and Greeks are the same.
Okay.
Yes. I think we're all human beings, and we should all just live together.
Yeah.
So remembering that 50 years earlier now, 1948, we're all the same people, yeah? And now suddenly the British and French have drawn lines everywhere. And if you have a look at Australia as a country and have a look at the border South Australia shares with Northern Territory, Western Australia, and most of New South Wales and New South Wales and Victoria, they're straight lines.
Yeah.
No, the only time borders have straight lines is when colonialists draw them. The border between Victoria and New South Wales is the Murray River. Geography generally creates borders, yeah? When they're straight lines, it means a colonialist has drawn them. If you have a look at all of Africa, have a look at the Middle East, there are a lot of straight lines. And it's because the king of this place wanted that bit and the queen of that place was promised that bit, and someone drew a line and went, now you've got two different passports, but yesterday my brother was on holiday, now he's in a different country.
Yeah.
And so when you think about that as borders, yeah, when the Palestinians were fleeing their home, and George, if we were neighbours and my house was on fire, I'd like to think that I can come and live with you until I rebuild my house.
Yeah.
And that, if my kids are hungry, you'd feed them, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Well, that's what you should look at the Arab world like. Now, what was very clear to the Arab world and the Arab leaders was that the Israelis had expelled the Palestinians in order not to allow them to come back so they could create this Jewish-only land. And they were never going to have a part of that. And so the Arab countries, shared the house, yeah? But we are talking now 77 years later. There's a point at where, if my house burnt down, George, after 77 years, you'd go, Nasser, really, I'm well and truly over you. I would suggest that as a human being, you should never get over another human being, but, there is a reality that we have to. Not everybody is going to think as purely and as naively in humanity as I wish to believe.
Yeah.
And so those Palestinians ended up in those collar countries, and always with a desire to go back. And Israel declares independence on May 15, 1948. All of these white countries rushed to accept
Galvanize
Israel as a country. And it exists. Now, Israel doesn't get admitted into the UN for another year or so, and the UN passes a resolution, a Security Council resolution 194, which says that every Palestinian refugee must be allowed to return, and if they don't want to return, they have to be given compensation. And Israel's admission into the United Nations was predicated on the full application of UN Resolution 194. Remembering, the partition of Palestine was a suggestion, never had Security Council resolution approval, so it's illegal. The partition of Palestine was illegal. Over and above which, if you move past that, its admission into the United Nations, into the world body of countries, was predicated on my dad being allowed to go home if he wanted to, or taking a cash settlement. And he was never allowed to go home. In fact, when he was dying and we endeavoured to find a way to repatriate his body and have him buried next to his mother and father and his grandparents. And in our village, you can read 7 or 8 tombstones of my ancestors. When we endeavoured to do that, and I called the Israeli embassy and said, how do I go about doing this? And they asked me, does he have an Israeli ID? And I said, look, he was born before Israel was formed. My dad was born in 26. Israel came to being in 1948. You threw him out. How could he have an Israeli number, Israeli ID card?
How did they take that when you said that?
He hung up on me. So I called back naively thinking we'd got disconnected. I said, listen, we just got disconnected. What's the process? And he said, we didn't get disconnected. I hung up on you. And there is no process under which your father comes back. And if you believe in a two-state solution, which I absolutely don't, we're in the Palestine bit of the two-state solution. Yeah. So theoretically, Australia believes that Israel illegally occupies Palestinian territory, and we're from the illegally occupied Palestinian territory bit. So they should not be allowed to say he can't go back. So back to UN Resolution 194, Israel is admitted as a country, enjoys the benefits of being a normal country, quote unquote, and has never actually fulfilled its obligation under any UN Security Council resolution. And today continues to act in contravention of. And in fact, the International Court of Justice in July last year ruled that the entirety of the occupation, everything since 1967, is illegal, that the settlements have to be dismantled, that all the settlers have to be removed, and that compensation has to be paid, and that countries like Australia have positive obligations not to aid the settlement enterprise. And countries like Australia continue to do so in breach of its statutory obligations.
Wait, as in Australia did aid or didn't aid?
Australia aids now.
Okay.
Australia aids today.
Okay.
So in July last year, when the ICC passed that resolution, the Colombians, I'm going to say the Colombians, they were a major coal exporter to Israel. And they said, and the Israeli energy company, IEC, doesn't have a segmented grid. So if you deliver coal to the ICE, Israeli energy company, IEC, they use that coal and create electricity, and that electricity goes to hospitals, schools, but also the military industrial complex and also the illegal settlements. And so Colombia said, well, if we give you coal, then some of our coal is going to go to the illegal settlements. The International Court of Justice ruling says we need to be sure that you're not. Can you confirm you're not? And they went, we can't confirm. So Colombia said, we're not going to sell you coal anymore. Well, in November, Australia sent coal to Israel.
Yeah.
So we now send coal to the Israeli electricity company that doesn't have a segmented grid, and it produces electricity that goes to illegal settlements and also electricity that gets turned off on the Palestinians. And we know 8 days ago, Israel restarted the complete blockade on Gaza.
Yep.
Palestinians in Gaza have had no food, gas, electricity, water, anything for 8 days now.
So
on top of the 500 odd days before that.
So going back, because this is very interesting, right? And you're the first person in my life to explain this stuff to me in this way. And because the content online, it's all over the place, and it's very drama filled. So it's very hard to kind of grasp a true understanding of the situation. And it's very easy to get swept away by the drama of everything, because it's become almost like a sporting event. This conflict, but from the 1960s, right? You mentioned the Spanish and what they did to the Aztecs and the Mayans. They were just brutal and they just got it done. How come from the Ottomans in the 1920s, they just came and got it done. They killed 3 million people, got it over and done with. How come these people survived and thrived? Not thrived, but survived in a way where they could still have millions of people. Like, why didn't the Israelis just come and just get the job done? Like, what happened?
Yeah. I mean, so we should be clear. It wasn't just the Spanish one. I mean, the Belgians did it in the Congo. 20 million Congolese. Yeah. I mean, the French. The French. What the hell is Kanaki, New Caledonia? How is that part of France?
Yeah.
Right. So we should be clear that colonialism.
Even Australia wiped, was it the millions of people dead? Like the Coorong, where I'm from, in South Australia, we have something called the Coorong. It's the largest lagoon in the world, basically, and it was basically, they call it the New York for the Aboriginals. It was a huge population there and completely wiped, like gone, like nothing ever existed there. And even like places like Kangaroo Island, it's called the Island of Death, like just gone, like ghosts almost. So. I guess I'm curious. Why didn't the Israelis just turn on that and just get it done? Like, just get rid of everyone. Why? What happened there? Was there like a strong resistance force? Was there, like the Afghanistan? No matter what the US did, they couldn't get it done. Same with Vietnam. No matter what the US did, they couldn't beat Vietnam because they were so good at guerrilla warfare. Was that a similar circumstance or?
Well, I think people will in the future will be talking about Palestine in the same way, George. When you kill for land, that's not your land. When you're prepared to die for land, that's your land. There's a difference between an Indigenous person fighting for dirt that their ancestors are buried in, that their ancestors toiled, versus settler colonialism, yeah? And Zionism is a settler colonialism movement. It's a movement exactly like Australia and everywhere else, where we, a civilized population, came to a impoverished, uncivilized people and took their shit. Now, you could not do in 1948, after the horrors of the Holocaust, after World War II, the war to end all wars. That's how it was framed, where we created the Genocide Convention, international law, the United Nations, and we had all these august bodies created. They could not do it.
You couldn't pull it off. It was too modern. But if it was like maybe 50 years beforehand, like the 1920s, you could do it.
Look, I don't know if you could have got away with it in the 1920s, but certainly 1820s.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. I feel like the Ottomans got away with a lot, and so did the Bolsheviks, and
Well, so George, this is the important thing. Black people killing black people, nobody cares.
Yeah. Yeah.
Brown people killing black people killing brown people, again,
nobody cares.
No one cares.
Yeah.
If you're the military-industrial complex, and a lot of people don't get this, if you've got a cow and you milk the cow, you need people to drink milk so you can milk him tomorrow. Her tomorrow, milk the girl.
Yeah.
And that's how that economy works. Milk the cow, drink the milk, milk the cow, drink the milk, pay, boom.
Yeah.
If you're the military-industrial complex, you make bullets. Now, you make bullets, missiles, tanks, airplanes, whatever. Unless there's a war, you have to close the factory because the bullet needs to be used. Now, in the military-industrial complex, the best thing is brown people killing black people killing brown people.
Yeah, good money.
Others. As long as it's others, no one cares.
Yeah.
No one cares, yeah? And so that's best case. Second best case is white people killing brown people because, democracy, whatever you want to call it, we've got to get the savages, yeah? And particularly think about the West, not the global South, but think about the West and the narrative in the West. And the worst bit is if white people have to kill white people, because then we're like, how do we do this? Well, it's good for business anyway, right?
Yeah.
So
Ukraine, Russia right now, similar.
Yeah. So you go back to Armenia and etc. And it's brown people killing brown people, mate. It's never going to be news. Like, does anybody know who King Leopold was and what he was doing to the Belgians? What the Belgians were doing to the Congolese? Yeah. Does anybody know what the Dutch did in Indonesia?
Cyprus, that was in the 90s.
Cyprus.
It was literally in the 90s. Like in my lifetime, people were literally being killed and their land's been taken, and because it's brown people versus brown people, no one cared. They're like, oh yeah, the Cypriots, whatever.
George, it's happening today in Myanmar with the Rohingyas. It happened 4 or 5 years, 10 years ago in Sri Lanka with the Ceylonese. It's happening today in Sudan and Congo. It's happening today all over the place. The horrors that Indonesia is doing to the West Papuans, Indians are doing in Kashmir, Moroccans are doing in West Sahara. But no one cares because it's brown people.
Yeah, the Chinese and is it the Burmese as well?
No, the Chinese and the Uyghurs.
Uyghur people. Yeah.
But again, yellow people and brown people and green people, they're not. And if you remember when the Russians first went into Ukraine, there was this mashup of these clips where these British foreign correspondents were going, this is not some third world country. These people are white. They watch Netflix. They're civilized, as if we don't have Netflix and we're not civilized and, we're not human beings. The narrative that was happening there, and it's a really great mashup. I tell people to go find it. I mean, it's on my Insta page somewhere. But, this is Europe. This woman, peroxide blonde, she's in the press vest and, got the helmet on and war scenes behind her. This is Europe, like the outrage. Now, could it have happened in the 20s and 48? Possibly, but I don't know that they could have got away with it. People that had just experienced a genocide, could they get away with doing it? They couldn't. And so if we go back there, we had a couple of, great lies that Israel rolled out. Number one was this was a land without people for a people without a land. That, we didn't exist, that we weren't there, that Palestinians weren't there and hadn't been there for millennia. And secondly, that the Palestinians voluntarily left, that we just, picked up and left. And you might be able to see just here, there's some keys. And they are keys to our ancestral land, a house on our ancestral land.
Oh, wow.
And you also see some dirt there, and that's dirt from our village. My father knew he managed to get back to Palestine in the 90s, and he had a feeling that he wouldn't be able to go back and that he would die here. And he brought soil back from a tree that, he used to sit under with his grandfather and his father. And so some of that dirt has been sprinkled on his grave here in Australia.
Wow.
So no Palestinian left willingly. Zionism, as it is today, this political ideology that, and I want to talk about the unholy trinity in a second, but this political ideology of Zionism, it has to be clear to everyone that it's an ultra-nationalist supremacist movement that wants a Jews only state in Palestine, and that there were Palestinians there. And the only way they could establish it, and the only way they can maintain it, is by getting rid of its indigenous Palestinian population, by ethnic cleansing and genocide. And they were the only two options available to them then, and they're the only options available to them today. And so if you go to October 7 and see Israel's reaction since, and, as Palestinian as I am, I was shocked by, what happened on October 7. Shocked in the sense of, I can't believe they got out of that cage. Shocked that somehow it happened. But I was devastated because I knew Palestinians knew what Israel would do.
Yeah.
Now, on October 8, Israel, if it was quote unquote a normal country, if it wanted to exist in peace and fraternity with its neighbors, if it saw everybody as equal, it had a unique opportunity on October 8 to say to the world, we need help.
Yeah.
But it didn't. It reverted to the Old Testament, and an eye for an eye.
Yeah.
And in fact, an eye.
Blood and fire, total war.
100 eyes.
Yeah. Which is very American as well.
What it is, brother, it's not an American thing. It's a supremacist thing. And so, the British did that here. The Spanish did it in South America, the French, the Belgians. It's a colonialism thing if you think you're superior.
Yeah. This is my issue, right? People are going from both sides. People are like, poor little Palestinians, this, poor little Palestinians, that. And then I got people like, no, the Arabs are actually brutal people. They love war as well. They want to slaughter, the scimitars, the swords and the flags. They're not these nice, love-hugging people. They also like to murder and kill. That's just the way it is. So how do you delve with that? How do you conflict with those two? Everyone loves war. It's not like a...
Well, no, I don't agree with that.
Okay.
I don't agree with that.
Okay.
No, nobody. I don't think, hold on, pause. I'm sure there are people who love war.
Yeah.
It's not a normal human condition. Yeah. I read a study years ago about the death to injury toll of World War I. And in World War I, the number of bullets used to number of deaths versus number of injuries. And it's not a normal human condition, George, for the rich guy that runs my country and the rich guy that runs your country says to me and says to you that we hate each other, that we have to kill each other. That's how the world works. But it's not normal for me and you to be looking at each other in our guns and go, I have to kill him.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to do stuff to me to program me that you are the devil. Right?
Yeah.
You have to do stuff.
Yeah, other you.
Other me, etc. Now, go to World War I and the Western Front and German, French, Belgium, Dutch, Russian, Austrian. I mean, they're just white dudes, yeah?
Yeah.
Looking at other white dudes.
Yeah.
And, great big fat kings and queens are moving pieces on those great big chessboards, going, move the ships here, move the ships there, etc. That Nasser looking at a scope at George or George vice versa goes, at the last minute, pulls the shot. Because we don't want to do it.
Yeah.
because it's not human to kill another person. I'm hungry, I see a rabbit, shoot the rabbit, eat the rabbit, fish a fish, etc. And throughout war, the bullet to death ratio keeps getting better. Less bullets, more deaths. It was after Vietnam and stuff, Gulf War I, that they went, we really got to step this up. And they created, the Americans created VR training games, you know?
Yep, I've got VR.
Hollywood ramped up the stereotype brown.
Media, yep. Russia versus America,
fear,
Arabs versus whites.
Arab Muslims, swords on flags.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how a sword on a flag ever killed anybody, but whatever.
I've got a sword right there.
So, you know, all of this Orientalist, dehumanized language and this VR stuff meant that the kill ratio, bullets per human, fell through the roof, through the floor, Afghanistan and Iraq, second Iraq. And what happened is they've got this cohort of diggers as well, but particularly US ex-service people that are committing suicide because they're just completely fried. Yeah, because not a normal condition for a human to kill a human. Yeah?
Okay, so you believe that fundamentally because there are
absolutely,
because the way that you're right, the media has portrayed that there's just these Arab leaders who are like bloodthirsty murderers who hate women, who want to just kill everything.
Nobody's got more blood on their hands than Bush and Blair and John Howard and Obama and every one of these American prime ministers. I mean, America's been at war for 99% of the time it's been.
I mean, they nuked a whole. They nuked twice, like people. Like
and Japan was done. They nuked them to let the Soviets know that they were in. We had the bomb.
Yeah.
It served no military advantage.
It was a symbol of power.
Yeah.
And
it was a display of power.
Yeah, and I guess, look, America is the big daddy, right? They're going to do that. Because that's just the evil way of human nature, right? We live in a reality that's not sunshine and rainbows. Let's just say there is going to be these harsh realities that we all have to deal with, we all have to process, and we all process in different ways. And you know, everyone. If you look at the economic world, the investment economic world have put their money into America. Now you have BRICS in the rise. You have BRICS, which is some sort of resistance to the G7 coming through. So you are seeing a resistance there, economically speaking. But yeah, there is a tale of the big daddy America will stomp on anyone if they need to. And look, I'm not saying that's a bad thing necessarily. Maybe there needs to be a big daddy who does that. But at the same time, there are victims. And, you know, just like Palestine has been a victim too in terms of Rothschild deals, and just like the Greeks would deal like with the British, like, you know, the Greeks also had to deal with the British and they did similar things. And, you know, even Gallipoli, I could argue, was the UK basically took advantage of Australians and let them just 100%. Be massacred.
Not basically. I mean, we should just very quickly speak about that. The fact that we venerate the Anzac spirit around Gallipoli, where wild colonial boys filled with imagination and hope of adventure left the farms of Bendigo or you know, Yakandanda or wherever they left, got on ships, sailed for months to get dropped off in full kit in the middle of the Mediterranean to an elevated position where the Turks just mowed them down as a distraction. That we venerated that as Anzac spirit, that some rich fat white dude will use our best and brightest, youngest and most able as a distraction. That's Anzac spirit. When Australia needed to be defended against the Japanese in World War II, the same guy, Churchill, the same guy that allowed for this massacre in Gallipoli, the same guy said to Prime Minister Curtin when he called and said, I need the Australian troops out of North Africa to come back and defend Australia. Churchill said no. Curtin ignored him and called the generals and got the troops to come back and into New Guinea and saved Australia from a Japanese land invasion. That should be celebrated, the defence of Australia, not the sacrifice of kids for naught in Gallipoli. We should be, that's a national disgrace and we don't talk about it.
Do you know who Tucker Carlson is? Have you heard of Tucker Carlson?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so he talks about this quite a bit. He's not a big fan of Winston Churchill, and he's one of the only
No,
political
he's a war criminal.
commentators.
Winston Churchill's worse than Hitler. I mean, you just have to look what he did to India.
Yeah.
And Bengal. He killed millions of people, starved them. Yeah, no, this guy is a war criminal. The fact that he's celebrated in the West as some sort of titan. I mean, Hitler wasn't bombing London. And Churchill started bombing Berlin. And Churchill's own general said, if we bomb Berlin, he will bomb London. And Hitler made a speech and said, stop bombing Berlin.
Yeah.
Because I will nuke, or not nuke, but flatten London.
I've seen the speech. Yeah.
I mean, this guy, and the reason he did it, the reason he put his civilian population in harm's way, and tens of thousands of Brits died, was so that he could get the Yanks involved in the World War II.
Yeah. I know a lot of people don't like Tucker Carlson, but good on him for kind of pointing it out, because I never knew any of this stuff until Tucker Carlson mentioned it with his Piers Morgan interview. I never knew that Winston Churchill just gave Poland to the Soviets. I didn't know that about all these innocent bombings he did. I didn't know about any of this stuff until Tucker Carlson mentioned it. If anything, Tucker Carlson thinks Winston Churchill is one of the weakest leaders the UK's ever had.
Mate, all I know, I don't know, I'm not going to compare him to any other leader. I'm just going to say that he's a war criminal, and I am sure that the devil is keeping him in good company.
Yeah.
The victor writes the story, George. The victor writes a story. But I have no doubt.
Most of the time.
With Stalin, with Hitler, with King Leopold, with all those evil people, that they are, Margaret Thatcher, that this prick is rotting in hell. Ariel Sharon and Benjamin Netanyahu's on his way.
Even the idea of evilness, like that, I don't even know, like those people were just, that was just the standard back then, right? Like that's what I mean. If you go back even to Alexander the Great time or Genghis Khan, like these people were the standard, and standards change as we progress through human evolution, through human theology. Like I like to, but then you have these things like the conflicts that you see in Russia and Palestine, and then you're like, oh, maybe have we advanced? Have we progressed? Maybe we're just the same, but we're just better at hiding it. I don't know. Like maybe we haven't lost that.
I think you're right. That power always wants more power, George. I think you're right there. I think the nobody's ever claimed to be civilized before. I don't think Genghis Khan went, we're bringing civilization to you. I mean, empire then was about land, etc. We look at today, you don't actually need much land to be a global power. Look at Singapore, Japan, they're not big countries.
Yeah.
But, strategic assets where land actually is. And, we talk about Zionism as a political ideology, and I'll tell you that it's rooted in white supremacy and fascism, that the overwhelming majority of Zionists in the world are not Jewish. Okay. Yeah. A lot of Jews are Zionists, and perhaps a majority. But the majority of Zionists are not Jews. Joe Biden, way before he was president of the United States, was, if there wasn't an Israel, we'd have to create one. Yeah. And he wasn't talking about a homeland for the Jewish peoples. He was talking about a garrison state to help secure the empire. Yeah.
So can we touch on the theological justifications for Israel's existence for a second? So, I've heard argument around Israel has biblical rights to exist in that area and have its own, defined kingdom. And anyone who opposes that are going to be cursed, right? That's kind of the sentiment. When you hear this, what do you think about that? I'm just curious in your thoughts around this.
Look, So one of the biggest challenges is getting people to understand just how close Jews, Christians, and Muslims are. Okay. All three of us.
Let's hear about this.
All three of us believe in Noah and the magic zoo boat. Okay. 2 lions, 2 zebras. And if you ever look at that magic colouring book back in our kids, the lions were both male. But anyway, the magic zoo boat. We believe in the parting of the sea. Yeah, we all believe that Moses went up and got the 10 Commandments. Yeah. Yep. Jews, Christians, and Muslims all believe in that same stuff. Jews didn't believe that Jesus was the Son of God. Yep. Didn't believe he's the Messiah.
So wait, because I used to think this, but then according to a guest I had recently, and I won't say the name, but apparently there are Jews who believe Jesus is the Messiah. I never knew this. But yeah, according to this person,
Right.
okay,
If you're a Jew and you believe in the Torah, the Messiah is coming.
okay.
Yeah.
So the Torah directly, because I got the feeling that there must be some Jewish people. Okay, I won't say all Jewish, but there must be a small or maybe bigger amount of people who believe maybe Jesus is the Messiah, right? But
Well, that's the whole concept, George. If you believe Jesus is Christ,
yeah,
and you believe in the Holy Trinity, the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, then you're a Christian. You're not a Jew.
yeah, and that's what I thought, right? That's why I still
So
believe
if
that.
you're a Jew, you believe in the Ten Commandments, Noah, Moses, etc.
Abrahamic
Adam
stuff,
and Eve,
yeah,
all that stuff, which Christians believe and Muslims believe. Adam and Eve, 7 days, Gabriel, Michael, believe all that stuff. You're a Jew. And if you're a Jew, the Messiah is coming. If you're a Christian, you believe that Jesus was born of Mary, virgin birth, immaculate birth. He was born in a stable in Bethlehem, and he died on the cross so that all our sins would be forgiven. He was resurrected 3 days later and ascended to heaven to sit on the throne.
yeah. That's a Christian belief. But is that also an Islamic belief or not?
No, so that now you're a Christian.
Okay.
So if you're a Jew and you now believe that Jesus you're no longer a Jew, you're a Christian.
Yeah. Okay. So you've transitioned into the next.
Yeah, you're
level.
now a Christian.
Yeah.
Now, a Muslim believes that Noah was a prophet of God, a messenger of God. Abraham was a messenger of God. All of the great prophets of the Old Testament were prophets according to Jews and according to Christians and according to Muslims, messengers of God. Muslims believe in Jesus. They believe he was a messenger of God, not the son of God.
So why is that a thing? Why did that happen? Why don't Islamics believe?
Muslims don't believe that God can have a son.
Okay, so they don't think he can. But so they don't. The Islamics don't think God could manifest a physical human.
He's God, he can do anything.
Yeah.
But they're saying that God is a oneness, a supremeness, and he doesn't have a physical manifestation.
Okay.
Whereas as Christians, you have the Holy Trinity, the Father, Son, the Holy Ghost, and they're a oneness.
Yeah.
And Muslims don't believe that.
So why is that the case? Because as you said,
Brother, it's religion.
Oh, okay. So it's just
you're not going to be able to undo with logic what people have as a faith.
Okay, but I guess
if you want to say something to me, I'd go back and go, in 6,000 years, Adam and Eve. And do you know Adam was 900 when he died?
Yeah.
That Noah was not 800 and something when he started building the ark.
They weren't having microplastics in their diet.
there are bigger questions to ask than why Muslims don't believe. Muslims just don't believe.
Okay.
And
I guess I wanted to talk about the principle of that because I think the breakdown of
you need a different person for that.
Okay.
I'm here to talk about Palestine.
Okay, cool. I will explore that, and I appreciate you because you have got me to the point where now I want to also explore that. So I want to acknowledge you for that. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Nice. So the sameness. So Muslims believe that Christians and Jews are children of the book.
Okay.
Is the translation. Islamically, Christians and Jews go to heaven.
Yeah.
Because we are all
same
of
heaven?
the book. Same heaven.
Okay.
Same heaven. We're all of the book.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the book is the children of Abraham and all the way through. Now, Muslims and Christians both believe that Jesus went to heaven, Son of God, not Son of God, Prophet of God, Son of God, and that Jesus is coming back.
Yep, to be king of the earth one day, right?
Yep.
To have children, to have a family, and to be buried next to Muhammad. Is that my understanding correct?
You might have lost me a little bit there.
Okay.
But the Muslims believe that Muhammad, peace be upon him, was the last prophet. The next prophet will be Jesus.
But not the son of God.
Not the son.
Okay.
No. But he'll be the Messiah. Yep.
Yep.
And so that sharedness across the three faiths, the children of Abraham, is how Muslims, Jews, and Christians lived in Palestine for millennia. Now, for millennia, every couple of hundred years, somebody else came through. The British, the French. As I told you, the Anatolian and the Lydian Greeks were there for longer than the first Hebrew Empire. The Phoenicians.
Was that Philistine? The name Philistine, Palestine, is that the Cretians, right? The Great Cretians that came through? Is that wrong?
there was Jebusites, Canaanites, the Romans were there. The Crusades went.
Alexander Great's remnants.
There's a village near our village. There's a village near our village, and they're really proud of this. They're all redheads.
Yeah. Then that's the Macedonian.
And I remember one time I was there in Palestine, and I said to my cousin, I said, "Oh, be careful over here with that." And he goes, "What are you talking about?" I said,
I've got Palestinian friends who are like Arab but have blue eyes. I'm like, oh, okay. You got some.
My brother's got green eyes. My niece is blonde.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like there's blood everywhere in all of us. Crusader, leftover blood, whatever. I mean, this village might as well be in the Highlands of Scotland.
Yeah.
And he said, "That's your cousin." And he started talking to me. And imagine your Greek is Aussie Greek. It's not really Greek. And when you go there, they go, your accent hurts our ears a bit.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's kind of, they love Aussie Greeks because they think we're like going to give them heaps of money.
Heaps of money, yeah. It's not Greek, yeah?
No.
So is my Arabic, yeah?
Yeah.
It's Aussie Arabic.
Yeah.
And this guy, and I mean, he could have been a McGregor, is speaking to me in the absolute perfect Arabic, And to go now, somebody who's Chinese, ethnically Chinese, and I'm saying Chinese to give you like a complete example, converts to Judaism, is accepted by a synagogue as a Jew. That person in the state of Israel has the right to citizenship. They call aliyah, which is return, ascend, go back. That Chinese Jew can go back to my grandfather's village, and we're talking 77 years ago. My dad was there picking lemons, and live there as a citizen, collect social benefits because of their religion. That's absurd.
Yeah.
And that's what Israel is, an absurdity that we've got a country that has been created solely on the basis of religion, imported those religions from all over the world and said, this is our land. But not just that, this is our land that they took off me, so they had to steal it off me, kill to get it, and then to maintain it, they have to continue to oppress us, which is what we're seeing in Gaza today, but also in the West Bank, also in Jerusalem, and also in historic Palestine, inside what is quote-unquote Israel. And Israel's got no borders, yeah? There is no borders to Israel. Like Australia's got borders. Every country in the world's got borders. There's disputes over places in, Kashmir between Pakistan and India, between India and China. In fact, there's a border dispute and some other places. But Israel's got no borders. The only border it's got is the Mediterranean Sea and with Egypt. Everything else is up for negotiation according to them.
Yeah.
With Palestine.
So is that kind of like a conquering mentality? Like we can go wherever we want?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and that's what settler colonialism is, George. You just keep settling more land by getting rid of more indigenous people.
Yeah.
Like Australia, the continent wasn't conquered straight away. You get somewhere and you just keep killing. And if you go back to where we were before, about 1948, they couldn't do to us what every other settler colonialist did because it was 1948 and because we just passed the human rights law and, international law. They couldn't do it. Not that they don't want to do it, because we're seeing in Gaza what they've done. They've made the entirety of that population, never before has 100% of the population been displaced in a war. All of the infrastructure destroyed, schools, no Palestinians been to school in 17 months.
Wow.
It was International Women's Day over the weekend, and I still look to women feminists and they talk, why are they screaming about the Palestinian women that for over a year have been having cesarean sections with no anaesthetic?
Wow.
Or women that are creating sanitary pads from tent pieces and old towels.
Damn.
Why is nobody talking about what Palestinian women are going through, the feminists, let alone all of our human rights laws and all of the everything that we can say about Ukraine and Zelensky and everything, but can't say about Palestinians and Palestinian right to self-defense.
Yeah.
We're just immediately terrorists.
Let's go into that. So Hamas, right? Hamas views on Israel. These are things I've asked questions about, and apparently the claims are that Hamas sees Jews as a barrier to Islamic domination and want to annihilate them. Is that like, I don't really know much about Hamas, all besides what the media has said, that they're just a terrorist organization, and that Israel and Palestine will never go along as long as Hamas is in power.
So, I mean, you're right. This is conjured up by the West, and in particular by colonialists and by Zionists. Yeah, and remembering that when we say Zionists, most Zionists are not Jews.
Yep.
Many Zionists are heavily invested in the empire that is Western imperialism.
So just to be clear, Zionism is a political ideology. It's not a religion in itself.
Correct.
Yeah.
And we should actually I'll preface this discussion with what I call the unholy trinity. We've got the Holy Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Ghost. The unholy trinity is what's happened in Australia today and increasingly throughout the West. And it's the conflation of Zionism, a political ideology, Israel, a bit of dirt, and Judaism, a religion. Now, when I criticize China for what they're doing to the Uyghurs, I'm not being anti-Chinese. I'm being a human being. I'm standing up for human rights. When I criticize communism, I'm not being against the Chinese. I don't believe in that political ideology. Mm-hmm. If I go, it's the Chinese fault that the coronavirus came, it's all Chinese people's fault, then I'm a xenophobe. Right? Yeah. There's a difference between all three of those things. And you can take that across any human being. If you go all Muslims or Saudi Arabia or capitalism, etc., you are, in fact, ascribing the intention of everyone onto one thing.
So it's a stereotypes and broad speak versus niche speak / individual responsibility speak, if that makes sense.
So Zionism as a political ideology said Nasser's dad has to leave that house, Nasser's grandma has to die, Nasser's dad has to go to another country because this is our house. Somebody promised it to us. His God promised it to him 2,000 years ago. That's Zionism.
So is that a form of racial superiority then, in essence?
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely, it's racial superiority. Zionism is absolutely a supremacist, ultra-nationalist movement founded in the very basis of white supremacy. Absolutely. And so that's a political ideology. Now, understanding that many Jews believe in Zionism.
Yeah.
Doesn't make all Jews bad.
Yeah.
And if you say all Jews or Rothschild's conspiracies or Illuminati or octopuses or then you're a nutter.
Yeah.
Yeah? Take some personal responsibility for the fact that you've got a shit job and maybe you should have tried harder at school or work harder at work. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not there,
the white guilt.
Yeah. Take some responsibility for yourself.
Yeah.
And you've got more bones to pick with capitalism than you do with Judaism. Yeah.
Yeah.
Judaism is a religion.
Yeah.
Judaism says, love thy neighbor, do not steal, do not covet thy neighbor's wife. The 10 commandments are in Judaism as they are in Christianity, as they are in Islam. Yeah. And if you hate someone because they're Jewish, then you're an anti-Semite. You're just a scumbag.
Yeah.
Now, in Australia, we have created this, the Zionists in Australia have manufactured definitions and they're doing all they can to morph anti-Israel, anti-Zionism to equal anti-Semitism.
Yeah. And I know.
So today, if you go, what Israel's doing is wrong, they go, you're an anti-Semite.
Yeah, it's linguistic warfare, we call it, in propaganda. Because I was actually mentored by a propagandist for many years, and I learned about all these terms where you can, because reality ontologically is language. So if you control the language, you control reality itself, because your memories are based only in the thoughts you have, which are the intrinsic framework of reality itself. Like I don't look at, when I'm looking at things, I'm using language to kind of, and symbols to recreate that reality around me. So if you control the words that people can speak, you control the narrative, and there's nothing you can do about it.
And so if you're losing the narrative, like people are anti-Israel today, people increasingly are aware of what Zionism is today, and so they're becoming anti-Zionist. So if you're losing, and Israel is losing, be very clear, Israel's losing, you need to start redefining those words.
Yeah.
And so we've got a concerted attempt to redefine what is. So our Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, an Australian Jew, parents of Holocaust survivors, he said, people say Zionists, they mean Jews. It's anti-Semitic. It's not anti-Semitic.
No. Yeah.
It's not anti-Semitic.
So okay, but the tough question, I guess, is, like, Hamas, right? Like, when I try and speak to very intelligent, highly successful people, it seems like the linguistic cornerstone of all of support for Palestine falling is just to do with the Hamas and what it leads to the conversation. I want you to be aware of this, actually, because I've talked to some very powerful people about this stuff. They go, the sentiment is, okay, what Hamas did was despicable, October 7th. They can never be forgiven. We either have to eradicate everyone or get rid of it, and that's just the way it's going to be, because it's never going to heal. The Palestinian people are like injured children who are traumatized, and if you're going to adopt a bunch of children, let's say you're a person who wants to adopt children, you never want to adopt all the traumatized children because your household's going to be messed up. No one's going to adopt these people. Either get rid of them or give them to someone else. That's the kind of the sentiment, and it's pretty brutal.
And it's a very easy sentiment to have, George, in a white colonial, neo-colonial imperialist space.
Okay.
And it negates individuals, human beings, their rights to self-determination, their rights to resist occupation, and it falls into this real simple binary that October 6th was okay. October 6th wasn't okay. In the year from 1 January to October 6, 2023, Israel killed 250 Palestinians. Not once, 250 precious human beings, Muslims and Christians, were killed. Not once did one of those make a story. But that was in the 75th year after they killed my grandma and at the end of a bayonet made my dad end up here.
Yeah. They killed your grandma?
They bombed our village, and my grandma died in a bomb.
Okay.
That's how my dad ended up here.
Wow.
So this didn't happen October 7th. And then you say, well, it must be all Hamas. And I'm not a fan of Hamas. I'm not a hardcore Islamist. I'm a Muslim. But I absolutely believe in the Palestinian right to self-defense, the absolute right for Palestinians to resist occupation as enshrined by international law, as everyone should be resisting occupation, whether they're Ukrainian, Congolese, Sudanese, West Papuan, etc. The Palestinians have a right to their ancestral homes, not only as individuals, but based on international law. And we want to... what's the word that our foreign minister and our government uses? The rules-based world, the rules-based order. We want to revert to that, where you can't have a rules-based order that says we're going to force our banks to divest from Russian stocks. We're going to rename Chicken Kiev to Chicken Kiev. We're going to supply Ukrainians with armaments. We're going to rehouse Ukrainian refugees. Today, a refugee who was pregnant and her husband died fighting the occupation, and that woman is born in Australia and the child is born and the dad's dead, and that child never knows their father, was never born on their ancestral land, no one's going to say to that kid that they can't go back to Ukraine.
Yeah.
But they say to me that I can't go to Palestine.
Okay.
Yeah? So that hypocrisy of rules-based order, we've got rules for Ukraine white people and rules for Palestinians, brown people, Muslim people. That's the root of the issue. Over and above which, the actual injustice, the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, the imposition of a Western colonial state onto an indigenous people, that needs to be sorted out. And the solution, George, the solution is one that's founded in humanity, and it existed as my dad, the life he lived in the 20s and 30s as a kid in Jerusalem. And God willing, one day you get to go, George, because it is beautiful.
I want to go.
The streets that Jesus walked in.
Yeah.
They didn't know if they were Christian, Jew, or Muslim. Today, Ramadan and Lent have overlapped. So in Jerusalem today, there will be bells for Ramadan, there will be bells for Easter that will overlap. And there will be, invariably, because there are many Jewish holidays, I imagine, a Jewish holiday that will overlap as well. And my dad used to say, when you heard a bell, You didn't know if it was a Christian holiday, a Muslim holiday, or a Jewish holiday. You just knew that there was going to be food and sweets. And so you were wrapped at the hearing of the bell, when you were 8 or 9 or 10. And it was, if it was Easter, the Christians would say, come and eat, feast with us. And if it was Yom Kippur, the Jews said, come and feast with us. And if it was Eid, the Muslims said, come and feast with us. That's what the future is, a country that is decolonized and where there is equality, not what is happening today, which is genocide and apartheid.
Okay. Well, everything you've said I've processed, right? And one of the things that's kind of flown to me is, I'll use my historical background because it's good to use metaphors, right? It's like Greece versus Persia, Hellas versus Persia, right? Mm-hmm. At the end, and we can use maybe white colonization versus the Arab world or the Middle Eastern or the Islamic world, let's just say. The reality is now we have two powers. And I guess the argument I've heard from Israel's side is the way Islam is structured is that they will always seek hostility towards the Jews and Christians, apparently, right? That's what I've heard. And then you could say vice versa. Now I'm starting to realize, well, vice versa, the white colonists will always have hostility towards the Arab world and the Islamics. Like this, it's like almost like the Persian-Greek wars. They will hate each other because that's just the way it is. Like that isn't. It's just the. If this was like this is a structure, this is the structure. You can't do anything about it. That's just the way it is. It's built that way, and that's the unfortunate truth. So the reality then it comes down to me. And then I'm as a human, I'm going as a critical thinker. I'm going. Well, common sense tells me that it's like it's Arsenal versus Tottenham here. They're always going to hate each other. They're never going to be friends. There has to be a winner, and there's always going to be games, and sometimes Tottenham will win, sometimes Arsenal will win. But I don't like to make this into sport, but it feels that way now. It's kind of, and it's. I'm not happy about this, by the way. I'm not happy about this sentiment, but it does feel a very us versus them mentality, and it does feel like it's never going to end because there always has to be a winner. And like, is there a bridge? I guess my question is there a bridge? Is there a pathway, a spiritual pathway, maybe to us all coming together and uniting again?
Importantly, the first thing is to go to those books. And let's not talk about any of the other books, but just the Torah, the Bible, and the Quran. None of them says kill and take their stuff. None of them says that. None of them extols a virtue. If you're a true Jew, a true Muslim, or a true Christian, you need to steal people's stuff. You need to murder people's stuff. You need to rape them. None of those books say that. Throughout time, humans, men, have used books, texts, ideologies to advance power, wealth, empire, etc. There is nothing stopping every human being from living together as human beings other than our will to resist leaders that try and divide us. As Martin Luther King said about his children, he dreams, I have a dream that one day you will judge my children by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Now, we're a long way from that, and that was, 70 years ago. And we're still we're much closer than we were, but still miles away from where it is. And it can happen, George. And what we need to do as free thinkers, as people who want to challenge, who have a platform, is to not give in to this Tottenham versus Arsenal binary stuff and say no, that just because you want to hate, I'm going to hug you. And every time you want to hate me more, I'm going to hug you tighter. We have to lean into our common humanity, and our common humanity is based on love, and it's based on our need to share and look after one another. It's not normal for me to see you and say, you've got a different religion, I hate you because. No book teaches hate. No book teaches hate.
Yeah.
And we've got to resist that urge to simplify things into a binary where we're being programmed to. No, we haven't been programmed to. No, a child is born precious and beautiful, and the womb it came from, the house it was born in, will determine who. One of the best things that, I remember how odd it was when we were growing up. We had a necklace, and I say odd, not for us, because it was normal for us, but for everybody else. We had a necklace, because we were wogs, you have to have a gold chain just over. So the barber knows where to stop shaving your neck, you know. So it goes, ding, no further down.
Done.
But we had a necklace, and it had a crucifix, and it had a map of historical Palestine, and it had a Quran. And the map of Palestine was between the crucifix and the Quran. And people would say to, you know, my dad would say to us, he said, if anybody ever asks you if you're Christian or Muslim, you know, just show them your necklace. This is when we were kids, yeah, before we really developed any sort of ability to articulate or argue for ourselves. And then, you know, as we grew up, he said, you know, if anyone cares, hi, how are you, George? Lovely to meet you. What's your religion? If that's somebody's second or third question, what are you doing in that conversation? What are you doing in that conversation?
Yeah.
Just move on. And anyone that wants to judge anyone else based on that third question, and sometimes second question, might even be first question for some people, before they ask you your name, what's your religion? Because they might not even want to know your name without your religion. Why are you inhabiting that space with that person? And, you know, my dad said, you know, you grew up, you know, Mum baptised us, as I told you. You know, we used to walk the Good Friday church and, you know, try to explain to white Aussies in the 70s when I grew up why our Christmas was 2 weeks later as Orthodox Christians, and what Eid was and what Ramadan was and why we were fasting and why we're fasting, and yes, not even water during the day. That when you're old enough, you'll decide what religion you want, if you want to be religious, how you want to celebrate, whatever. The womb you came out of shouldn't dictate who you become, how you think, etc. And so, I mean, I know, you know, I wanted to play soccer or footy. I can't remember which one, but, you know, we had Sunday school, and I was like, Dad, you know, we're Muslim, you know, do I have to go to Sunday school? And he was like, you have to go to Sunday school, yeah. And then, you know, Mum, do I have to go to the Arabic school and the Quran school on the Saturday? I want to play footy. And she's going, yeah, you have to. So, and the only times we didn't have to go to, you know, one of those two schools was if there was a protest or a rally and we had to go to the city. But yeah, so we never got to play team sports on the weekends. But we've got to resist the urge to define people, and thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people based on how they celebrate God, because that's not who they are. Palestinians are indigenous to that dirt. They belong on that dirt. And like all indigenous people, like First Nations people here, they just want respect. Indigenous people here, black fellas here, don't say get out. They want a treaty, want recognition, want compensation, and want you to listen to them. They want self-determination. Exactly what Palestinians want. Now, in Nasser's world, anyone who has any supremacy, however that supremacy manifests itself, George, if you're a Jewish supremacist, a Muslim supremacist, a Christian supremacist, you have to leave. You have to leave. We're not room for supremacy.
Yeah.
But what people are talking about in Palestine is, you know, if you were to take it back to South Africa, is imagine having a black state and a white state. Nobody proposed that in South Africa. They just went, let's just end this racial segregation that some people get to vote because they're white and some people don't get to vote because they're black. Well, in all of the land that Israel controls, which is all of historic Palestine, a bit of Syria and some more of Lebanon now, there's only one currency, only one ruling power, only one birth and death registry, and only one entity that controls the entry, egress, imports, exports, tax system, and that's Israel. But half the people, in fact, just over half the people, don't get to vote. Now, and we don't get to vote based on religion. It's apartheid.
Yeah.
And we knew what to do in South Africa. We ended apartheid. Everybody got to vote. And then we got a whole bunch of white South Africans that came to Australia, particularly Perth and New South Wales, that went, I was always against apartheid. You go, you're always against apartheid. You left there in 2000. Like you left after Mandela got out of jail. You know, if you're against apartheid, you would have left in the 70s. And we will have a lot of post-decolonized Palestine Zionists who were always anti-Zionist. And they're like, yeah, sure you were.
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack here, right? And I guess I want to ask you a question about solutions, right? But before we get into solutions, like I love what you just said. and the heart and love in me wants to go, yes, that is the way. But then the logical side, my brain side goes, well, the reality is we are humans that have the spirit of evil and goodness inside us, and evil seems to have quite a grip on humanity right now, and this whole supremacy versus supremacy thing is prevalent, and it doesn't look like it's going anywhere right now, and it's disastrous to even talk about. Like, even saying this out loud makes me upset, but I'm not delusional. I have to live in the reality of what I'm dealing with. Like, if I see a line on the field, I'm not going to walk towards it. I know it's there. I guess it's important for me to say that, because I guess my next question is, if there is solutions to the Israel-Palestine conflict, if there is a pathway towards, a roadmap towards healing the situation, how does that look for you, and what kind of things can we do to make that happen?
So first, George, you're a smart guy with a platform, and I know that you see the line. It's your job to walk to the line and cross it. Yeah. If you're not going to have the courage, who else is going to have the courage? Mm-hmm. If not me, who? If not now, when? Yeah. It behooves all of us who have been, who are educated and independent and smart enough to have the courage, for humanity's sake, for me, for my children and unborn grandchildren, for you. I don't know if you're married or got kids or whether you're planning that.
Yep,
but for our collective better.
Yep.
Yeah. We have to have the courage to want to make the world a better place for everyone. So that behooves all of us. And I'd encourage anyone that's watching or listening to have that courage to fight on. And the solution in Palestine is us collectively leaning in. And if you have a look, if October 7 hasn't proved anything else but the disconnect between Zionism, a political ideology, a fascist, supremacist, ultra-nationalist movement, that ideology, and an increasing number of Jews. You have a look, the student protests overwhelmingly in the US were led by anti-Zionist Jews, by intersectional allies from Black Lives Matters, from queer movements, by Palestinians, by Muslims, Christians. The encampments in Australia, and I went to 4 of them. In every encampment, there was a strong Jewish presence. I went to, I can't remember which university it was, but it was Chinese Students for Palestine, and they had all their literature written in Chinese, yeah?
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing, because when we talk about fighting for Palestine, we're talking about fighting not just for Palestine in its own, but Palestine is the exemplar for a resistance movement, if you will, against empire, against the corporation and the military-industrial complex, against imperialism. And because Palestine's a fight we can win, and I can say Palestine's a fight we can win because the indigenous people are more than half. Yeah? If you look at every settler colony and the struggle between indigenous people and the colonizer, in every other situation, the indigenous people are micro percentages. You know, in the US, it's like less than 1. In Canada, it's tiny. Here it's 3, whereas in Palestine we're more than half.
Yeah.
And we've made connections all over the world, and increasingly the world has realised that a fight for Palestine is a fight for climate justice, a fight against misogyny, and it's a fight for equality and humanity for everyone. And so that's what's making our fight is being resisted so powerfully by the West. I mean, if you have a look at the whole world, George, and just go back to October 7, like historic Palestine fits in Tasmania like 6 times, and you can spin it and it wouldn't touch the edges, yeah? So it's a tiny bit of dirt. And from October 7 to December, in those 3 months, Biden went, Blinken went 3 or 4 times, America sent a nuclear sub and a battleship and an armada. Battleships don't go on their own. They go with cruisers and all that stuff. Macron went a couple of times. Richie Sunak went. We sent Scott Morrison. Like, what the hell for this piece of dirt that's so tiny, a speck on the other side of the world? The whole of Western Empire went, what do you need?
Yeah.
The British are still flying flights over Gaza. We're using Pine Gap to give the Israelis military intelligence. The US has flown a shipment of arms every 18 hours for 520 days, George.
Can I quickly say this? This is important because this is the biggest criticism of the Palestine protest movement, and I want to kind of lay this out to you because I feel like I want to do it in a way where I'm trying to be helpful and empowering. I'm not trying to be a dick.
No, be derivative.
I'm not trying to be a dickhead.
I've been on Sky News half a dozen times. Okay. Nothing you can say will upset me.
Okay, good. Because a lot of the criticism is, especially for like let's say the common sense or the populists, right? The Trump lovers, the populists, the global kind of center-right takeover at the moment. Because, the last 20 years have been quite, let's say, woke, right? So there's a huge uprise now in populism. And you can almost say, I don't like to use the word, I don't like how people go, it's fascist movement. No, it's just the center-right movement, maybe even traditional left movement that's kind of coming through, I believe. And when people see, like me, for example, when I see like LGBTQ supporting just like a religious kind of Islamic thing, when I look at that, it kind of makes me laugh a little bit. I go, that's a bit ridiculous. And
so pause there, George.
Yeah.
That's because you've been programmed to think that.
Yeah, well,
I've just told you. Yeah. I've just told you that my mother's Christian.
Yeah. No.
The fight for Palestine is not for an Islamic caliphate.
Yeah. But I'm just saying.
I just told you that every supremacist has to leave.
Yeah.
Christian supremacist, Muslim supremacist, Jewish supremacist.
No. I understand that point. That's not my point. My point is more.
No, but you created a conflation that why would these queer people be there? Because Muslims hate queers.
But
there are Arab queers, mate. There are Muslim queers.
Of course. No, I understand. Yeah. Trust me, I understand all that nuance. My point more is optically as like a propagandist. If you want to make the movement look silly, you create something called polarity cycles. So the polarity cycle is, okay, one way to make a movement look silly is you have people who are supporting a movement that doesn't support them, and then it creates a logical fallacy in the movement, and then common people go, oh, it's an easy way to manipulate the masses to go, oh, that looks ridiculous. Like, who are these people? They look so ridiculous. Why are they supporting? And I know your point about removing Islam, Christianity, because at the end of the day, there's, Orthodox Christians, Orthodox Islamics, Orthodox Jews probably don't all agree with LGBTQ, right? They probably all sit in that same camp. They're all united in that one thing. I'm talking about it more optically don't look at it as like a personal attack. It's more in terms of performance for the Palestinian movement as a whole. How do we get the common sense people to really step in? Because right now when you say I'm a Palestinian supporter, immediately you're going, okay, he's just a woke idiot from the university who has no idea about life and reality. That's kind of the sentiment at the moment.
So I mean...
And I don't want that. I want it to be... if I can help de-propagandicize that aspect, because it does scare a lot of average Aussie blokes. I don't want to be associated with the wokes, or I don't, and that's a serious issue for your movement because it will negate the possibility of this true potential to actually help the people of Palestine, which I think is what you ultimately want, right?
Of course.
But how do we bring a more broad scope?
I have principles.
Okay,
George, I have principles.
Okay,
yeah? And I the very first protest I went to was in 1969. It was an anti-Vietnam War moratorium march. And I found out about the fact that I attended that rally, Flinders Street in Melbourne, because I was listening to a podcast with my mother during COVID, and she said, we were at that protest in December of 1969. And I said, well, that's my first protest. She goes, what do you mean? I said, well, you would have been 6 months pregnant with me.
Yeah.
Like I was born 3 months later in March. So the fight for Palestine in 1969 was us being in a Vietnam War moratorium march.
Yeah.
Yeah. Me as a 6-month-old fetus. Yeah. So the fight for humanity and for justice is an intersectional, connected one. And the same fight, I voted yes for marriage equality.
Yeah.
It's my personal belief.
Yeah.
I believe that anyone should be able to get married. I don't give a stuff, If anyone wants to get married, if you're queer or not queer, Muslim, Jew, whatever, I don't care.
Yeah.
I have fought for Indigenous rights. I've fought against offshore detention. I've fought against everything HEX, I got a degree for free.
Yeah.
Every politician in Parliament today, quote unquote, not every, but certainly everyone that's my age, 55 and above, they got uni for free.
Yeah.
Like we're a country that's rich enough to give people university for free. I fought against that. Now, if in my movement, LGBTQ plus I person, queer person wants to march for justice for Palestine, and you're telling me to make myself more marketable to that person, I got to get rid of them.
Mm-hmm.
They're not ready to join here because my fight is their fight and their fight is my fight.
Okay.
And humanity dictates, principle dictates that my job is to stick with those people because they were with me on October 6th, George, when people didn't care about Palestine. There's a lot of October 8 Palestinian supporters and we welcome them. But nobody gets to come and tell Palestinians who their friends should be.
Yeah.
And there's a very, very...
so it's a metaphysical unification process.
Well, it's a humanity-based position, George. I remember I saw this thing with Nelson Mandela after he got released from jail and he was president of the US and he was doing this tour of the out of jail, president of South Africa, and he was doing a tour of the US. And he was getting quizzed by this CNN guy, like the CNN guy of the time. And he said, a lot of people are criticising you for being friends with Yasser Arafat, chairman of the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization. You're friends with Muammar Gaddafi of Libya. You're friends with Fidel Castro, And he said, well, a lot of people mistake that I have to be, you want to be my friend today, that I can't be friends with people who supported us when you weren't our friends.
Yeah.
When the ANC was a terrorist organization. When I was, and it should be clear, Nelson Mandela was on a terrorist watch list in the US till like 2008.
Yeah.
Like 20 years after he'd been released from jail. That now you want to be my friends. You want to forget the people that were with us when nobody was our friends?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, we believe we are principled people. We believe that everyone should be fighting for everyone equally.
Yeah.
And today, when we go back to that analogy I gave you in those first 3 months of the West and imperialism, how much power was focused in saving Israel post-October 7, you can't but realize just how invested the world is in making sure that Palestinians are smashed. And that is the fight against, the fight for our climate is smashed, the fight for against the billionaire ruling class is smashed. And there's a problem, George. There's a real problem in this country, and I think the whole world, where so many people, we've never been richer before, but we're now creating the new kings and queens are billionaires.
Yeah.
And the average human
I was saying, like, my dad came to this country, couldn't speak a word of English, created a highly successful business, bought an amazing, beautiful home. And now I've got kids my age who can speak English, they're highly educated, they're sophisticated, and they can't even pay their rent. That's the difference in cost of living right now.
Well, how did that happen?
Well, I tell you, in the 1960s, the average so it was a single home family most of the time, right? And it was mostly men, but that's not the point. They would earn, of today's money, the equivalent of $360,000 a year for one person. That was the average income. Then, now everyone's taxed. Now everyone has to work. And you know what? The women and the men still have to clean the house. Nothing's changed. It's just we have to work harder, we get paid less, and we're getting stuffed by the elites, basically. It's called elite theory, by the way. It's a Machiavellian style.
I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's a theory. I think it's like fact.
Yeah,
I mean,
there's different.
How much money does Gina Reinhardt get to keep because her grandfather got a picture of some premier, in I don't know. How did she get all of WA's mining rights forever?
Yeah.
How does that work?
Yeah,
Now I get somebody like the Atlassian boys invented some stuff and they made a business that's worth billions of dollars. She didn't invent anything. Like, you could run that joint. I don't think she's smarter than you.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure people you went to uni with could do her job.
Yeah.
Like, could she do what,
who knows?
Somebody who invented something. Like
who knows?
The guy.
Maybe she's got something. I don't know. I've never met her, but I don't know. And that's a good question. You're right. And you know what you said before about when you answered my question about the LGBTQ thing, I think that's very important for people to hear because a lot of people who sit where I sit have never heard what you just said before, right? And hearing that, philosophically speaking, created inside me a sense of awe. I've never heard that level of unity in a long time. And you're right. My first protest was the anti-Iraq, the against George Bush. That was my first protest. I was 4? I don't know. I was a kid. I had no idea, but I loved it, right? And I see that. Like, look, you said you voted yes for the marriage, right? See, look, I have nothing against LGBTQ people at all. I have spiritual clashes within myself around marriage and what marriage means spiritually, sure. And even transgenderism, like I have a very profound spiritual understanding of transgenderism. Like I have a very unique occultic almost outlook onto it. Like it's very unique. And you know what? Actually, any transgender friends I have or people who are supportive of transgender, when I explain my theory of transgenderism, they love it. They think it's the most amazing theory ever. But we'll talk about that another day. But the idea is, for me, more is like the idea of unification it has a sense of purity almost like a love. But then I'm still clash with the logic side, like the dark. But logic meets love. Right. It's really...
If we just all go to the 10 Commandments, love thy neighbor as thyself, It can't be that hard.
Yeah.
The problem is we have to strip those that want to profit, those that want power, those that want resources away from our basic humanity. As a community, as a culture, if our weakest are warm and fed and educated and can get access to education and a living wage, then we're doing great as a community.
Yeah.
And what you talk about, your dad's experience, my parents' experience, yeah?
Yeah.
You could.
Have you heard of toxic empathy, by the way? Have you heard of the concept of toxic empathy?
No.
Okay, this is important because I want to bring... This is big. And I want to explain this to you because if you being one of the leaders in Australia should know about this. So there's a growing... They call it a common sense movement. So toxic empathy is when you're being empathetic, too much empathy. Have you heard of tough love before?
Yeah.
So sometimes, sometimes you have
just harden up, kid.
Yeah, it's tough love, right? So sometimes, like when I was a kid, I wanted to be a dinosaur, right? And I would walk around the school and I'd bite people like really badly, like to the point where teachers were calling like, George, you need to stop biting people. You're not a dinosaur, right? And
nice.
And that
not a fireman or a policeman, but a dinosaur. Okay?
yeah. But that was like the early 2009s. Now kids can get away with biting and pretending they're dinosaurs. Now there's something it's called toxic empathy. We're showing too much empathy. And we're not telling the kid, hey, stop, you probably shouldn't bite people. You're actually hurting, you're making them bleed, and you're causing damage. And that's not going to be good for your character development as you grow up. Because now, if I was being reinforced, I am a dinosaur, I'm going to grow up spiritually and mentally ill. And mental illness is now at an all-time high. Male suicide rates are through the roof. Even female suicides are through the roof. The unhappiest level of... women, particularly white women under 30, are now classified as the most unhappiest people in the world, according to the latest statistic. I could probably bring them up. I don't know. I'll put a thing here. So there's these, and the reason they say it's because of toxic empathy. We're being too empathetic, and there needs to be a point where there's a bit of a tough love that, like, no, enough's enough. If you keep doing this, it's going to hurt you in the long run. And because people are too afraid to say, hey, maybe you shouldn't bite people or pretend you're a dinosaur, it could cause problems for you in the future. Because we're afraid to say that, it's led to these common sense problems, which ultimately hurts the Palestinian movement, which ultimately hurts any climate change movement, which hurts the Aboriginal movement. Because what you're left with, this is the common sense argument now, is I want to support this movement, but there are so many victim lovers, people who seek victimhood because it's like, it becomes almost their badge of honor, their badge of life. And because of toxic empathy, no one's willing to call these people out. So I'm afraid to support the Palestinian movement because I don't want to be associated with this lack of common sense approach. This is like, I'm sharing. I actually, what you said to me before, I 100% agree with you. But I still am passionate about this as well. I actually don't want to see any more Palestinians die. I don't want to see more in Israel. I don't want to see people die. I don't want to. If I can create peace, if I had a magic wand and I could snap my fingers, I want peace. And this is my outcry to you. How do I get the common sense people from not just Australia, America, England, all across the world to really step in and go, I want this to stop. I want these conflicts to stop all across the world. And the barriers are, unfortunately, even though you're never going to turn your friends, and you never should. I agree with you. Fundamentally, I totally agree with you. But I am trying to work I'm a gamer at the end of the day, right? I'm an avid gamer. I was a professional gamer. I love finding metas. I like to win. I'm competitive. What are the ways to make this movement win? How does Palestine and Israel stop? How do they become unified? How is it?
So it doesn't stop there, George. I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you. If a kid is biting, at some point the kid needs to be taken away and taught not to bite. However that looks, I grew up in the 1, 2, 3 bang, right? And
ethnics. We're ethnics. I get it. Yeah.
I tried to do less of that, but apparently I wasn't as good, and hopefully my kids will be better.
Trust me, your kids will thank you.
I when I spoke before about Tottenham and you spoke about Tottenham
Arsenal.
and what was the other? Arsenal, yeah. I don't think about it just as Palestine, Israel. What we're looking at now, when you spoke about, your dad in today's money was earning $350,000 a year, and I imagine your dad, like my dad, didn't matter how much schooling or credentials he came with, he ended up in a factory and had to do menial jobs.
Yeah, he was a mechanic.
Maybe had a small business.
Yeah, he was a mechanic. Yeah.
Yeah. We grew up in the back of a milk bar, Georgia.
Yeah, same. Yeah, same with my family.
Or a deli.
Yeah, deli. Yeah.
And that fight for Palestine is also connected with your fight for a right to be able to own shelter. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if we're in a world where we're working, you go out and the average person does a day's labour, and a day's labour should pay for 1/7, a seventh of a week, 1/7 shelter, 1/7 food, 1/7 utilities, 1/7 recreation, pay for 1/7 holiday pay, and 1/7 of some future money. If your day's labour doesn't give you that, then there's a problem. Yeah, and that's structurally, as simplistic as that. If you take that out, to the whole world, we talk to firstly Australia, let alone the world. We've never been richer.
Yeah.
This concept of trickle down, it doesn't trickle down. They hoard at the top. The tax system, how it manifests itself today, with CGT discounts and no taxes on wealth, no hereditary taxes, inheritance tax, etc. The average working person today, they could be a university graduate. Maybe they're on 80, maybe 100 grand. I mean, how do they ever buy a house?
Yeah.
It's now that fight for the right to be in civilization is to have shelter, security, schooling, education, health, etc. That's a fight for Palestine. Yeah, that's a fight for Palestine. The fight for my daughter should be able to dress how she wants to dress and not get raped. My son, irrespective of his funny name, funny skin color, funny religion, when he puts his resume into a job, the AI shouldn't just discount it. Yeah. My daughter, thank God she hasn't been raped, has gone to get a job. She should get the same pay as John Lloyd Williamson III, who went to the right school, has got the right handshake and the old school boys tie.
Yeah.
Like, they are all the same fight. And when we say, I want to keep taking away from that Arsenal analogy, that binary analogy, it's not just about Palestine. When you think about a battleship and an armada of ships, a nuclear armed sub can destroy world. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
one nuke's go off, they'll all go off. Yeah.
Yeah. They'll all go off.
It's like I think it's Joe Rogan did a great episode about this. He got the world's leading nuclear disasterist to come in. He said, if one nuke goes off in 90 seconds, 4 billion people are dead in 90 seconds.
Yeah. Like, they all go off.
And it can happen at any moment. Any moment they might... Sorry about my wolf. At any moment...
And they park a nuclear sub off Gaza.
Yeah.
I mean, Gaza, if you're in Victoria, is like the Mornington Peninsula.
Yeah.
It's 365 square kilometres. It's about, at its longest 42 Ks, and then it's between 10 and 5 kilometres thick.
Yeah.
It's a tiny bit of dirt. They said a nuclear sub, and everybody went and said, what do you need?
Yeah.
What do you need?
See,
here's more guns.
See, going back to what you mentioned, your daughter, your son, right? The criticism would come in, like, this is the devil's advocate, right? And I'm doing this because I want to think of you as a friend now, from friend to friend. The reason why people have an issue, we've got the common sense approach is like, okay, you mentioned, your daughter should wear whatever she wants and not get raped, right? But then there's also the natural biology, like the human evolutionists will say, well, men are pigs and they will do terrible things. And if they are like lusting, they're going to do bad things. So you want to avoid, like, you don't leave your keys unlocked in a car, like otherwise someone's going to steal it, is kind of the saying. So it's like almost like there's a sense of self-responsibility as well within yourself.
Rather, the self-responsibility is on blokes not to rape.
Of course.
It ain't that hard.
Of course, but that's not the...
Here's rule one.
Men,
don't rape.
Yeah, of course, right. We all agree on that. But what I'm saying is, don't steal cars, but people are still going to steal cars. Don't rape, but people are still going to rape. Don't kill, but people are still going to kill, right? So if you're living as a human, understanding that there are bad things happening, your responsibility is like, well, there could be a bad thing that might happen to me. There has to be some level of, how do I avoid the bad thing happening to me at any cost? Like, I wouldn't walk into a jungle knowing there's a tiger in there. And like men are like these horrible, evil men who do these atrocities.
We're in the civilized West.
I know.
You know, we're teaching people how to live. You know, we're the West.
I know, but we're in the civilized West. But reality is, there are really dark people out there who do bad things.
Lean into love.
Yeah.
Lean into love. Yeah. And we've got to move away from this space where we create any sort of
so how did you get to this?
Guilt or responsibility on a woman. If a bloke rapes, it's the bloke's fault.
Of course, but that's not the argument. The argument for in the common sense populist movement is of course it's the men's fault, right? But
common sense ain't common, yeah.
Yeah,
and that's the challenge. Is we've made it so cheap.
Even with
what we need to do is not talk about common sense. We need to talk about shared humanity and why everyone's security. I mean, like at some point, we're going to have Marie Antoinette let them eat cake.
Yeah.
You know, when she's sitting there with her crew of, you know, courtiers and whatever, and somebody rushes in and says, Marie Antoinette, the peasants are at the gate saying they've got no bread.
Yeah.
And she said, let them have cake. And then they separated her head from her body. At some point, the masses rise up.
Revolutionary ideas, right? But how? So, okay, I guess my question is, so, and even when you mentioned the job, right? The men and female gender gap, there's all these theories around that. Economists say, because men typically work longer hours, and they ask for higher pay rises. So there's whole these debates that go along with that. And so I guess what I'm trying to press of you is I want to help you in a sense, and I could be completely wrong, by the way. What I'm trying to say is I want more people from maybe where I sit, or even further right, or even further to come with you, because I ultimately want peace for Palestine, right? Mm-hmm. So that's my intention.
The only way they're going to come with me, brother, the only way they're going to come with me is not for me to lessen my intersectional connection to every other struggle.
Yeah.
They're not going to come to me because I've got good hair and a nice smile. They're only going to come to me when they see that I'm equal.
Yep.
And the only time they're going to see I'm equal is when they realize that the mechanisms that are being used to oppress me there, Palestinians, are going to be used to oppress them here.
Yep.
And we are seeing that today with the University of Australia adopting this really terrible, despicable definition of anti-Semitism that is going to quell is purposely designed to criminalize and quell discussion of Zionism's crimes, of Israel's crimes, in order to protect Judaism.
Yep.
Now, we need to protect Judaism. We need to protect Jews. But we cannot strip human beings of their right to speak up against crimes of a state and of a political ideology.
Yep.
Now, that is getting rolled into the anti-protest laws all over the country.
Yep, happen here.
Which will mean tomorrow,
hate speech
when you
laws.
want to protest for better right, for workers' rights. I mean, protests aren't even protesting. You've got to get a permit to protest.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole job of... You know, when we talk about how society has moved, it's been moved not because bosses and employers decided to do better stuff for their workers. It's because workers fought for it.
Yeah.
Women fought for the right to vote. They rioted. They in the UK there was weapons were used for universal suffrage. But every generation looks back and goes, you know, we're done now. We don't need to do that. Well, today, we've got many fights, whether it's the fight to deregister the CFMEU, whether it's the fight for Indigenous sovereignty and treaty, whether it's, climate justice, any of those things. I mean, you know, we have to fight. And the rules that are being laid out on our movement, the Justice for Palestine movement, are going to be applied for everybody else. And I will just very quickly, you should, George, try and get one of the amazing teal women onto your show.
Yeah, I would love to. I was in Parliament.
Yep. I was in Parliament a couple of weeks ago, and I had a couple of Labor guys say to me something, hung parliaments and minority governments don't work, and, you know, these teal women. And if you looked at any one of these teal women's resumes, yeah, I'll talk about my local member, Monique Ryan, who's a paediatric surgeon, an amazing woman. You know, she earns perhaps a quarter as an MP as she would as a surgeon, yeah, in a hospital. If you compare her CV, her life's journey and stuff, to the average backbencher in the Labor Party or Liberal Party, you know, you'd say to yourself, you know, we've got a problem. We've got a problem with our parliament, who's representing us and who should be representing us and what that might look like. And then you say to yourself, you know, what the extraordinary women that they are to have been able to achieve that in a space that, quote unquote, wasn't as woke as it is today. Yeah, and the barriers that exist today for women. And, you know, a reality, you know, like a woman, many of them want to have children, and the time they take to have children takes them out of their careers and, in fact, impacts their ability to be, you know, take leadership roles later in life, you know, because they leave in their 20s, come back in their late 30s, perhaps 40s, and now are working for people they used to mentor.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
How do you overcome that? So,
and I guess, have you heard of Patriot theory? Look, I'm going to bring up things to make you aware of. You don't have to at all, but I've always wanted to have the opportunity to reach someone like you who has the influence to be able to just even process this stuff, because you don't have to, there's nothing you need to take away from what I'm saying, but I feel like I must do something because I want to be helpful and empowered. But there's a theory called Patriot theory where if you want to distract the masses in propaganda, right? If you want to distract the masses from the ultimate goal by the elites, you have to create diversion tactics. So it's kind of cultural war aspects. So if you can get people like you to be distracted by, like, I don't know, it could be any movement. Let's just use, I don't know, LGBTQ or women's rights, whatever. Like even all these things. What the elites like to do is they like to pay, fund, and facilitate, let's say, woke movements. Let's just use woke movements as a way to distract those type of activists to then be consumed by this thing, so that it creates a shadow over the real thing that they actually want, which is more money, more power, more control. So what you do is it's a division tactic. So, for example, the yes vote. The conspiracy is the yes vote was put forward because we can now go, oh, look at all these like activists who want to create a division within within Australia. That's like an example. And then you can kind of other those people. Look how crazy these white people are. Look how crazy these activists are. You don't want to follow them. And you can take advantage almost of kind-hearted, conformist / contrarian types who are like lean towards that love and unity for all method. So it's a very complicated subject. But basically what I'm saying is just take a look at that. There might be potentially the elites taking advantage of people like yourself and others to distract and divide the culture through cultural wars, to get in the way of the true thing that these elites want, which is more power, more money, more wealth, and more control. And they will use the most sophisticated, most intelligent forms of manipulation that you could ever think of, the most malevolent forms of manipulation, like Black Lives Matter, for example, or like the LGBT community. They will use that as a way to distract you from what they truly want and distract the masses, so that we're all now focused on these cultural wars. Oh, woke this, Trump this. We're all distracted on these things now, and we don't give a fuck what's happening around Palestine or Israel. We don't give a shit about what's happening in Russia, Ukraine. We don't care about any of these things because we're so distracted by all these other things. And because there's so much passion with these type subjects, like, of course, the women's rights thing, there's so much passion behind it. It's very intoxicating. It's very easy to just fall into that, and that's it. And then we let go of the elites. We let them just run around and do whatever they want because we're so distracted by these cultural war aspects. And because at the end of the day, it's not a cultural war. It's us. It's the elites versus us, the peasants. That's the real war. That's the real fight. And we're also distracted by men versus women, black versus white, this versus that, this versus, like, we're never ever going to unify. We're never ever going to be able to come together as one and actually face the real problem, which is the elites versus us. That's called the patriotic theory of, division. And I'm not sure, to this day, I'm very, I trust issues. I mean, it's like, who do I go to trust? Because who's trying to divide me? Who's trying to distract me? Who's trying to get me wrapped up in another culture war so that I take my focus off the elites and what they're truly doing to the world? That's kind of like my rant, I guess. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of this stuff before, but
looks a solid rant.
Yeah.
I
it's an art of war.
I can't not believe that there's an element of, media, power. Have a look at Elon Musk in the past 2 months, what he's been able to do. Whether it's Bezos writing a letter in the Washington Post about what their editorial stance is going to be, or Zuckerberg changing, their, I can't remember what the fact-checking algorithm that they had within Facebook and Instagram was. There's no question that power wants more power, power wants more resources, and will do what they can to get it. And the easiest way to do that is to distract the masses. And the easiest way to distract the masses is, in fact, with alcohol and sport.
Yeah.
In the West.
Yeah. Bread and circuses.
Yeah. Bread and circuses. Yep. And the easiest way to distract in the global South, the developing world, is to make them hungry, steal the resources. But that then comes back to why the pendulum will snap back, and will snap back when that guy, we're going to use a guy as an example, won't join our protest for a free Palestine because there's a pride flag there or an indigenous flag, and because he goes, it's too woke for me. But at some point, those things that are being used to oppress that will impact him. And he will see that those powers that are seeking more power and more resources, that billionaire class, that they will go, I need to get involved, and how am I going to get involved? And when they do get involved, they'll find that we're there.
Yeah.
That we're there.
Yeah.
And when I say we're there, I mean not just Palestinians, but us who have been fighting this stuff, from 91 when you went as a 4-year-old to the Iraq War, through to 69 when I was in my mum's tummy, we fought for everyone.
Yeah.
And when it gets to them, and this is one of the challenges, it's that famous poem by a German. He said, they came for the Jews and I wasn't a Jew, I didn't say anything. Then they came for the socialists and I didn't say anything because I wasn't a socialist. They came for the unionists and I wasn't a unionist. They came for the gypsies, I wasn't a gypsy, so I didn't say anything. And then they came for, so on and so on. And then they came for me, and there was nobody left to say anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we really, again, as I keep saying, need to lean into the common humanity, to love, to each of us, that we each belong, that we're all precious, that irrespective of our colour, our name, our skin colour, our religion, if we celebrate that we're all equal, if we all lean into that, and we all must be afforded a dignity and an equality and a right to enjoy our lives free of the dictate of any of these Machiavellian machines and entities, that we have that right, that if we all lean into that, that's justice. And if you look at the whole world and go back to that nuclear sub that sat off the end of, a bit of dirt, just a bit bigger than Kangaroo Island, yeah?
Yeah.
A nuclear sub. Imagine, we've got to protect Kangaroo Island. The whole of that empire, all those structures are all focused there because they know if they smash Palestine, and you have a look at all the things that are happening in the world, what has elevated the consciousness of this, liberatory movement or liberation movement or justice movement across the whole world, it's been Palestine. If they can crush Palestine, they can crush everything. Mm-hmm. There isn't no other movement ever again will rise up in the world like what has happened in the past 17 months. Nobody else will ever rise up again. And so that's why all of that power, all of those structures, so invested in crushing it, because they can roll that out stage 2. China would have had their Taiwan takeover plan, right? I mean, they've got one. We know they've got one.
Yeah, of course they do.
And they had one that was, here's the plan. And then Russia went into Ukraine and they went, okay, They cancelled their SWIFT code. Do something so we don't have to worry about SWIFT code. Then they seize their assets, slowly try and get some of our assets back. And then they renamed Chicken Kiev. Whether they call it Peking duck or not, I don't care. And then they went through the whole, how did the West react to Russia?
Yeah.
And then they adapted Taiwan Plan 2.
Yeah.
And then they saw what Israel did to Gaza, and they went, Taiwan Plan 3.
Yeah.
What we have let pass in Gaza is the new global standard. It's the new global standard, and the West will pay for its complicity, because it's not Nasser that can hold it to account, but it's Russia, it's North Korea,
China.
It's
China's a 6,000-year-old country that has anything that's happened in history has happened in China, and people underestimate China like a mother. China.
They're just sleeping dragon. I mean, it's just crazy.
They are literally a dragon ready to be unleashed.
I mean, like we all went to school, and in grade 7 or 8 we had to do timelines, and we had the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, and the timelines, and they all overlapped, and we had to colour them in. And none of them said May 15, 1948 was the end of Palestine, but they were like bar charts. Well, the Chinese thing has been sitting there the whole time.
No, it's never gone away. People don't realise China is the big daddy.
And when you're in the West, you don't look back and go, okay, this is when the Byzantine Empire ended. Well, this is when the Persian Empire rose, and know that it was the 5th of October or the 16th of January. They're just bar graphs. And they're 100-year ascension and descension. And anyone that doesn't think that we're not in the ascent of the Chinese Empire, what that might look like, and the descent of the West, is not really paying attention.
Yeah, you're right. There could be this almost like Alexander Great, the Persian and Hellenic world come together again to take on the beast of the dragon at some point.
No, but these things take 200 years, George, yeah? But none of them ever. No empire just gave the keys over and walked out.
Yeah.
They were violent, flaying tail fights to the very end.
Okay, well, I've got some final questions before I let you go.
Final questions, brother. I'm like, it's almost tomorrow.
This is good. Long format content, because this is a thing, right? There's a lot of criticism. Gavin Newsom just did a podcast with Chris Kirk. I'm not sure if Gavin Newsom is the governor of California, and the biggest. I would say I feel like you'd lean more left, right? You would say you're a left-leaning politic, you would lean left for sure, right? And the biggest criticism the right have of the left is that they're not willing to do long-format podcasts, because the right believe that the left's logic doesn't stand up in an hour-long conversation. And they believe that left-leaning politicians typically can only handle like CNN-style 10-minute, 5-minute segments. It's all scripted. And that you saw that with Kamala Harris's campaign. It was such a disaster because everything she said was scripted. Everything she did was scripted. There was no humanity to her. The one podcast she did, Cola Daddy, I mean, I don't know what that was. That was she should have gone on Joe Rogan. She should have just faced the dragon and done it, right? We would have got to know who she is as a person, and maybe she would have won more votes. But she didn't do that, and that's the biggest criticism. And if the left don't learn, if the left don't start to adapt and learn from their mistakes of the past, they will never win an election again. That's how serious this problem is for the left. And I'm passionate because I'm not a proponent of the right should always win or the left should always win. I want balance, right? I want like the Star Wars. I want balance in the Force. I guess my question for you, the new hate speech laws, the protest laws. I've been a strong advocate against all these things, and that's my connection with the left still to this day. Even though the left have abandoned me, the left think I'm this crazy fascist, whatever. That's fine. I don't care, because at the end of the day, it's like you. I will never give up on the left. I will always protect them in there. And if they don't see that now, they'll see that later in life. I truly believe that. And I don't like these protest laws because they harm the left, they harm the right, they harm everyone. At the end of the day, we're all humans. I agree with you. I actually have an agreement with you in terms of unity. Growing up as a kid, I was a little lefty kid. I still am at heart. People don't know that. But I guess my question is, how do people like me, you and others out there, how do we get around these hate speech laws? Because you can't even say Zionism anymore without being taken down. To be fair, just to give you I've been targeted politically. Like, my platform has been shut down. But before the referendum, my platform was completely shut down for 3 months. I got my platform back the day after the referendum. But to be fair, I was a bit anti the referendum. I didn't like the referendum at all. I thought the whole thing was.
It doesn't matter. I mean, why are they shutting it down?
Yeah, exactly. Because I thought, you know what, maybe I'm not for the yes vote because, and you know what, I'm marrying an Aboriginal. Like my fiance, she's got Aboriginal past. My kids are going to be Aboriginal. Like, so it's not like I hate Aboriginal people or anything like that. I just didn't like the idea of separating humans into different class structures. I thought that was a bit too far for me as a human. And also I thought this was more of a Machiavellian strategy to separate us even more because now it's become like there's like two subclasses. I was really worried about the Machiavellian style of play because I'm all about elite theory. I'm more worried how are the elites trying to distract the masses, right? So I guess my question is how do we navigate me and you coming together? You're obviously left. I'm a little. People call me right. Let's just say we're left and right. Let's just say that for now, for the sake of the argument. We've come together. We both have a common desire for unification. You've expressed your stuff, and I've respected everything you said, and I've tried to given you my little insights to try and help you. You've given me insights to help me. You might not know this, but you've helped me today a lot, tremendously. Even the way you've broken down the whole Palestinian thing, extraordinary. I've never heard it like that, and I'm really happy you've done that. How do we navigate together to bring people from the left and right together so at the end of the day we can bring peace, unity, and stop the bloodshed that's happening in Palestine, in the Ukraine, or anywhere else in the world? And directly for local people, how do we get around these hate speech laws, which now I'm afraid to say things like criticize Zionism or anything like that? How do we navigate this moving forward?
So how do we navigate this moving forward is we have to, whether they are left or right. And most people, I think, in Australia, probably are centre, George.
Yeah.
But they're centre because you get this as a Greek.
Yeah.
You'll get this as a Greek. Australians have never fought for anything.
No, they're a bit.
Right?
Yeah.
So we are the lucky country. And a big chunk of that is because, we're so far away. Robert Menzies used to say the tyranny of distance. We were so far away from Mother England. It was the tyranny of distance. We've never fought for independence.
No.
We've never fought against tyranny.
No.
Here, like the closest we got to anything was the Eureka Stockade, and that lasted, a few hours.
Or the Emu War.
Yeah. And everything else has been go somewhere else. And then we had PNG when the Japanese came to in World War II.
Yeah, Darwin, all that.
But we don't fight for anything.
No.
We Australians just go okay.
Laid back.
We just go okay.
Beers and barbecue.
Your gas is going up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The electricity is going up. Okay. You're not allowed to speak anymore. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you're going to have to, if you want to protest, you have to fill in this 10-page form. Okay. Whereas if you have a look at Greece, as soon as somebody says something, they close the street down.
Yeah.
Look at France. They close the street down. Look at Italy. Like the people, left and right, fight. About a decade ago, they changed the retirement age in France from 65 to 67. Yeah. And so, if you were 65, that's a shit sandwich, right? like you got the calendar going 3, 2, oh my God, 730, 729, right? Somebody's added 2 years. If you're 18, we're talking about 47 years later, yeah? That you're going to have to work for 48 years and 49 years. The average age of the protester was like 20-something. Like people said no. In Australia, we don't fight stuff.
No.
We just accept. We accept that it's okay for the whole mining magnate industry, which I think is criminal. Like Kevin Rudd, for all his good or bad, said we've got a once-in-a-generation opportunity to create a super mining tax on resources that our grandchildren, unborn grandchildren he was talking about, own, but we're getting no benefit from. A super mining tax. And the miners got together and spent $20 million and created a mining campaign saying, I'm in the mining industry, this is going to hurt me. And next thing you know, an intrinsically left policy, a red policy, a socialist policy of taxing the rich for resources that the community owns, resources.
The land.
They're taxing that and building schools, hospitals and roads, a Labor policy that never went to the community, to the constituency to vote on. Because the Liberals would go, no, they need the money because they'll build businesses and the business will create jobs and the jobs will create employment. Employment creates increased living standards, the right policy.
Yeah.
That it never went to us, the public, to say right versus left. That $20 million advertising campaign ended up with Julia Gillard overthrowing Rudd, minority government, Rudd overthrowing Julia Gillard, Tony Abbott, Tony Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison. I mean, the shitstorm we went through for 10 years because a Labor government was trying to do Labor shit. Was just amazing. When people realise, and you talk about all the distractions, when the people, whether they're right or left, realise that we have to fight for each other equally. When a guy earning $5,000 an hour tells the bloke on $100 an hour and has convinced them, maybe even $50 an hour, that the guy getting $15 an hour is the issue, we're going to wake up to that stuff. Yeah, it's not the immigrant, it's not the refugee, it's not the working poor that is the issue. The issue is that level of control and the concentration of wealth that is sitting with so few people. And in a country this rich, and I have my wife is a very religious Muslim woman. My mother is a very religious Christian woman. Mum lives with us. And I tease them because, I sit both sides. And I have a lot of faith, George, but not as much vehement.
Are you spiritual in any sense, or are you just more like, I respect?
No, I pray, and it's Ramadan now, so I'm fasting. Yep. And I believe in God, and I try and be a good person because I want to go to heaven. I believe in heaven and earth.
Yep.
But I'm not out there proselytizing. I don't say to people, you have to go my way.
Yeah.
But
it's personal. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I'll tease them about stuff. And I have one of the ones, one of my go-to teasers is, the magic zoo boat. But also one of my magic teasers is the Nasser's belief that the earth was created in 8 days. Because, the Bible tells us, the Torah tells us, and the Quran, that on the seventh day, first there was no light, God gave light, and then there was light, Adam and Eve, etc. On the seventh day, God rested. Well, in the Nasser theory, it's actually 8 days, because on the 8th day, God went, what am I going to do with all these resources? And then he dumped them in Australia. Right? In the Nasser 8-day theory, a country this rich, cannot have schools that don't have internet, kids that don't have laptops, hospitals, ambulance being ramped. Somebody like yourself, George, an intelligent guy that with, brains and smarts and entrepreneurial spirit, that you're going to struggle to buy a house unless your mum and dad, cut you a check for $500,000. The dream that he lived, my parents lived, that I got, that you won't get because I'm older than you, that you'll be denied that because of when you were born in this country. Now, let alone on this planet, because if you go back 400 or 500 years, a city or a town could only be as big as how far away its food was. And so if you wanted fresh milk, the cow had to be near the castle. But if you wanted an egg, it could be 2 or 3 days ride away. And a potato could be 2 weeks ride away. But now we've got refrigeration and we've got a world economy and we've got freeze packing that we can, anywhere in the West today. George, you're in South Australia, I'm in Melbourne tonight. We're going to have salmon fillets. I can go to any supermarket around me and know that I can buy a salmon fillet. Now, when you think about how much impost is in the supply chains and the breeding and the etc. of the fishes and the harvesting of and the distribution of, to make sure that here I am in middle class Australia, that any of the 5 supermarkets within 5 minutes of me are going to have salmon. I mean, a generation ago, your dad, 2 generations ago, my dad, even though, because he'd be 100 if he was alive today. But they ate what was there then.
Yeah.
They ate what was there then. I was in Italy a decade ago and we got lost and we were starving. We ended up in this like homesteady thing. And between translator and what little Italian we had, we asked for a menu. And she said, menu? Like, Mario got a rabbit today. There's rabbit stew. That's what we're having.
It's
That's
it's my grandpa. He ate corn for 3 years. That's why he hates corn. He's dead now, but he hates corn because that's how he had corn for 3 years.
what you had, yeah. I mean, we have the benefit of this world today that means
Abundance.
that the market is supplying us. Now, often, as Australians particularly, we don't think about where that came from and what its cost has been to the planet and to everyone else. But until we, as humans, and we can only talk about those that we can influence ourselves, George, you know, your networks, my networks, whoever might be watching this, and say that we all have to fight for each other. And when everybody realizes that, whether they're right or left or center, then we win.
Yeah, I agree.
And what we need to have is a principle that we embrace, a principle that we love, a principle that we're all equal and we're all precious. And if we hold to that, George, people will come.
Yeah.
People will come. And I say this because I don't know when the fight will end. I don't know when we will get justice for humanity. But what I do know, George, is if you have those ingredients as your integrity as a human being, the fight for that better world for your unborn children, your beautiful black Greek children, that the people that you will attract in your life will be beautiful people.
Yeah, yeah.
And the journey, irrespective of whether we get the outcome in your lifetime or your kid's lifetime, that journey, your life's journey, will be better. It will have more value and more meaning than the pursuit of shiny shit.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, on that note, Nasser, I want to say I acknowledge you. I appreciate everything you've just said. And also, just this whole conversation has been transformative for me. And I'm sure my audience who will listen to this will really, really get a lot of value out of it. And I'm excited to see the reaction because, yeah, you are a fantastic man. I appreciate everything you do. And, yeah, if there's any final words that you would like to say to my audience, contrarian, anti-mandate, anti-lockdown, anti-government kind of audience, if there's anything you want to say to them and that you think would be of value before I let you go, that would be great.
Well, I hope they're still listening.
Yeah.
If they're still listening, then they're on Team Nasser. But I'd say to them that Team Nasser is Team Us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what we need to do is get to that place where you know, we all have a fair crack. And the challenge is, you know, unless you're a member of the Lucky Sperm Club, you know, the chance at a fair crack wherever you are is pretty tough.
We're fighting for. All right, awesome. Thank you.